Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another meeting of the Planning Committee. I'd like to welcome you all to this meeting. My name is Nicholas Wright. I'm chair of this committee. Introduce Vice Chairman, Councillor Andrew Dyke, over there, and Committee Administrator Faith Quinn on my left, and Head of Legal Services, Heather Peachy. Kieran Power, Head of Development Management, Development Manager Carl Brace, and also we have Planning Officers Adam White and Matt Confield this afternoon. Also I'd like to introduce the Assistant Manager of the South Worcestershire Partnership, alias Drainage Engineer, which is Andrew Fowle. I don't normally give his full title. I hope you like that, Andrew. And just as a housekeeping, the fire exits in case of any emergency are to the gardens here and to the doors that you came in. This meeting is being webcast on YouTube, and we will have breaks depending on how we get on this afternoon. On item number 7, which is the planning application of Hernal Heath, the ward members, which is Councillor Birch, and myself will sit outside the committee, and Councillor Andrew Dyke will take that as chair of that particular item. Thank you. Are there any apologies, Faith?
Chairman, I have apologies from Councillor Eric Bowden, Councillor Mary Tasker and Councillor Rob Adams, and Councillor Paul Middleborough is subbing for Councillor Adams.
Thank you. Are there any notifications or declarations of interest?
Yes, Chairman. I have non-pecuniary interests have been declared by Councillors Emma Sims and Councillor Emma Kersey. The speakers, Christopher Houghton and Kevin Beasley, are known to them. This is for item 9. And also for item 9, Councillor Emma Sims has declared another interest, 2 other interests in fact, that she joined the parish councillors for a site visit with Turley Amber Homes, and that she is a business owner in Broadway.
Thank you very much. Are there any other declarations? Councillor Sims.
Sorry, I did actually amend the email I sent, which is it's Robin Goldsmith of the Broadway Trust, who is now speaking instead of Christopher Houghton. If I could just raise
Sorry,
that.
thank you.
Thank you.
Any further declarations? No, thank you very much. You've all had the minutes of the last meeting, which took place on the 7th of November. This is a true record. Are there any comments on the minutes? Can I have a proposer then that this is a true record? Councillor Dyke, thank you, and the seconder. Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Clapworthy first. Thank you. I expect most of you have been to a meeting before, a planning meeting. I just repeat this really. A lot goes into the planning application, starting at the case officer. And basically lots of agencies are contacted, as you well know if you've read the application on the website. Not just the individual planning application, which involves everything: Town and Country Planning Act, Planning Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Act, Orders and Regulations and Circulars published by the Secretary of State, the National Planning Policy Framework, Planning Practice Guidance, the Waste Course Strategy, South Worcestershire Development Plan and supplementary planning documents and guidance, neighbourhood plans where they're appropriate, etc. And the reason I'm saying this is because a great deal goes into sorting out information for each of these, and sometimes it's a balancing decision on planning. Sometimes you won't agree with the results, but I would ask you to respect the debate and this committee, even if you don't agree. Thank you. And again, for those who probably heard me say this before, for those who are speaking, and welcome to the speakers, we have quite a lot of speakers. You're allowed 3 minutes if you're a town or parish council. 3 minutes for those objecting and 3 minutes for supporting. If you go over the 3 minutes, I'm afraid we'll stop you. So try not to do it. And there are two of you speaking. In theory, you can have 1.5 minutes each, or whatever you decide to do, but it's 3 minutes in total. And if you've been here before, you'll know that the way it works is the planning officer describes the application, goes through the application, and then the parish council speak first, and then the objectors, and then the supporters, and then the visiting ward members can ask questions of the speakers, and then the committee asks questions, and then the ward members address the committee, and then it goes to debate. So that's how it sort of happens. Okay? Any questions so far? No. So we move straight into the first item, and I'll ask Councillor Dyke if he'd come up and chair this particular item. Thank you. There are speakers. I will save you the trouble, Andy. Councillor Sean Chandler from North Claines Parish Council, Mr. Simon Saint, and Ms. Kirsty Clifton. If you'd like to come forward and sit in the seats here. Thank you.
Are you all going to sit?
Yeah.
Sit over there. Thank you.
Do you want to take your name?
Oh, yeah.
Take my phone as well. All right? It's on.
Okay. Right, good afternoon. I just have a couple of minutes just to get settled. I think everybody's in place. He's saved me a job, or several. So thank you very much for attending today. We really do value people's support, particularly the speakers, who make a big impact generally on what the conditions are and how they affect the applications. So if we can start, please, with the parish councillor. If you'd like to say a few words, you have 3 minutes, as the chairman said. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, thanks for the opportunity to speak today. I'm asking the committee today to defer approval of this development plan. North Claines Parish has a neighbourhood plan.
Apologies. That's what happens when you get out of sync. Okay. We need to hear about the application. Yes, okay, we know all about it, but you want to look at that. Okay, is you doing this, Carl, or is Matt doing it?
It's myself. You, for better or worse, you have me, I'm afraid.
Okay, all right.
Thank you,
Go
Chair.
on, thank you.
Good afternoon, members, and thank you for your attendance on the site visit earlier today. The application before you is a full application for a development of 40 dwellings, including 40 affordable homes and associated access, drainage and green infrastructure. Some members will be familiar with the scheme and the site, which was previously before members in March of this year and was deferred for discussions to secure design revisions. As you know, we visited the site today, viewing from Dealmore Lane. We looked at Thatched Cottage and its setting, and we visited and viewed the site from a number of neighbouring properties, gardens. And again, thank you for your attendance, and thank you to those local residents for providing access to their property. The application is returned before you, further to amended plans that have been submitted, consulted upon and considered, and is presented with a recommendation of approval with the conditions set out and subject to a Section 106 agreement. There's a number of updates and points of clarification to run through before we begin the presentation in proper. North Claines Parish Council maintain their objection. Comments were received on the 4th of December to advise us of that, and their comments stated, the revised plan does not meet the planning standards required, and the previous objection from the Parish Council still stands. Education have also provided an updated response. Contributions required for the high school years only are sought for education, coming to a sum of £222,530. Just for absolute clarity, the original deferred application came to committee in March 28th of this year, and not May, as misreported on the opening page of the report, but I believe is correct otherwise through the report. For clarity, the street scene image under section 7.1 shows and refers to an earlier layout that has been superseded by the most recently amended plan that specifically swapped the house design types on plots 2 and 3. However, further to the text in report, this picture was provided primarily to give an example of house type designs to support the text. And finally, a full and updated list of approved plans under consideration formed part of Condition 2, and that list will be reproduced as part of this presentation. So the red star denotes the approximate location of the site within the district, and members will note that Fernhill Heath is located north of Worcester and south of Droitwich Spa. The site is shown edge red on this location plan extract and measures approximately 2.2 hectares in extent, and members will be familiar that residential development adjoins the southern boundary. The wider context of the site can be appreciated from this aerial photograph and the relationship with both the wider built extent of Fernhill Heath and the surrounding countryside. This committee and members will be aware of a recent appeal decision at Fernhill Heath in close proximity to the site, which is shown here in illustrative form. As members will be aware, that appeal was upheld and outline permission for 130 dwellings was granted. Turning to the amended layout that is under consideration, as you'll see, the site features 4 clusters of housing development with a substantial area of open space incorporating drainage arrangements in the northeast part of the site and a landscape open space buffer along approximately half of the southern boundary. The layout is a result of meeting technical requirements specifically around drainage as set out in the report, and I confirm there is no objection from either the LLFA or our drainage team. The Habitats Plan provides a useful demonstration of the amount and type of green infrastructure on the site as part of the proposals. The net gain in hedgerow units from the proposals is just under 29%, and there is an increase in habitat units to just under 33%. To put this in practical terms, new planting includes 76 trees, over 1,000 shrubs, and nearly 440 metres of hedgerow. As this application was submitted prior to the enactment of the Environment Act on the 12th of February 2024 in relation to biodiversity net gain, there is no legal requirement for the proposed development to provide a minimum level of 10% BNG, nor is there a development plan requirement to do so either. As such, for members, the BNG in this case would be a benefit to the proposal and should be taken into account in the planning balance exercise. The story height plan shows single-storey units in yellow, 2-storey in light brown, and 2.5 storeys in dark brown. Members will particularly note Thatched Cottage. This is the Grade 2 listed dwelling to the south of the site, with the nearest adjoining proposed dwelling not only separated by landscape and open space, but a 2-storey dwelling with a height to ridge of 8.5 metres as the nearest facing property. And that is a side elevation that faces onto its rear elevation. We're going to run through some sample house types for members. Members note there is a bungalow on the site. And turning to the tenure plan. The tenure plan shows the arrangement and mix of open market housing in green, affordable housing with social rent in blue, and first homes in the peach colour. On site today, we did explore the relationship of existing dwellings to the site in the proposals. Separation distances between the proposed dwellings and nearest existing dwellings have been considered, and as I said, we looked at this on site, and this is explored in a lot more detail in the report. The rear wall of Thatched Cottage to the side elevation of plot 3 is approximately 40 metres. The boundary of Thatched Cottage to the side elevation of plot 3 is just over 20 metres. From the boundary of Appledore to plot 22 is approximately 10.8 metres, and we saw that in quite close detail today on the adjoining dwelling. And the rear elevation of Appledore to the rear elevation of plot 22 is approximately 34.8 metres in distance. The nearest property to Appledore and the dwellings we saw today has a height to ridge of 7.8 metres and to eaves of 5 metres. For context, many authorities apply a 21 metre rear to rear distance requirement or guidance and a 12 metre distance from rear to side elevation. The Council's design SPD is silent on new builds, however the guidance relates to extensions, and we've applied that here, and that's the sort of normal practice, so we have some sort of a standard to work towards. A distance of approximately 12 metres should be maintained to a blank gable wall for rear extensions. The distance is required on a flat sites between a first floor extension window and neighbouring direct facing window should be at least 20 metres. So that gives you a context of how we have assessed the proposals here. Accordingly, as set out in the report, it's considered separation distances to adjoining dwellings are appropriate and amenity can be further secured through conditions relating to boundary treatments. Objectives are raised and highlighted the historic association of Thatched Cottage, which, do remind members, is a Grade 2 listed building to the application site. But members will note, following the 1751 map, the separation from the 19th century and the plot patterns familiar to today's experience understanding the locality emerge and are clear from at least 1888. Members will be familiar with the recent Fernhill Heath appeal decision, where the inspector considered that site in the context of Tappan Hill Farmhouse, which is referred to in the report here. A similar and consistent approach and conclusions have been reached with regards to the impact and scale harm of the setting of thatched cottages set out in the report. And here we see some pictures of the Grade 2 thatched cottage in its setting. Members will note the cottage has been extended and altered over time. A more recent development adjoins it. And members obviously saw those relationships today. The proposals are considered to result in less than substantial harm to the setting of this designated heritage asset. However, this is considered at the middle to lower end of that scale. The benefits of the proposal taken together are afforded significant weight and found to outweigh the less than substantial harm as identified and detailed in the report. I'm going to take members through a number of views over the site. Here's a view south along Dilmore Lane. Members recall that the road sign on the right is broadly the position of the new access, and a view back down north along Dilmore Lane with the site on the left. A view over the site towards its northern boundary. Site view west. And just for completeness, that's the full list of the plans that are before you under condition 2. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Carl. Now we get to the parish and town councillors. And it's Councillor Sean Challoner.
That's correct.
North
Thank you.
Lane. Off
So-
you go with your 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm asking the committee today to defer approval of this development plan. North Claines Parish has a neighbourhood plan. This was put in place reflecting the policies in the SWDP to guide and manage the ongoing development of the parish in line with the views of the residents. Within our local plan, development and design principles are described under policy NCD1. Developments need to demonstrate, I quote, 1 is the appropriate scale and mass, 2 makes efficient use of land whilst ensuring that the amenity of the area and neighbouring residents are not unacceptably adversely impacted, and 3 takes accounts and reinforces the existing landscape character and biodiversity assets of the site. The latest plan proposal is a backward step with respect to these policy items. In respect of appropriate scale and mass, the density and positions of buildings closest to Danes Green are more detrimental in this current proposal. The impact on neighbouring residents is unacceptably adversely impacted. Residents who currently have open fields are now faced with the highest density portion of the development along their northern boundary, with close proximity to the boundary line. 2-storey residences rather than single-storey bungalows are bordering the existing residents, leaving open areas to the north of the development, where there are no neighbours. The current plan encroaches on the existing houses backing onto the development from Danes Green. It's totally frustrating that residents have identified opportunities for the developer to reduce this impact and comply with our planning policies, details of which you will hear from Councillor Dan Birch. With some more work, I'm sure an acceptable plan can be reached. The Parish Council would respectfully request that the Planning Committee uphold the ethos of the local plan policy process and defer approval of the development plan layout until a more acceptable and compliant plan is presented, which aligns with the above planning policy items and addresses the concerns of the residents of Danes Green. North Claines Parish Council recognises that this development will go ahead, but requests that the developer recognises the policy of the made neighbourhood plan and the concerns of the Danes Green residents. Let's make this the best plan for Fernhill Heath and its residents. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much. With 41 seconds to spare. Now, Mr. Simon Saint, is that correct? You are
Thank you,
our
Chairman.
objector today. You carry on.
Chairman.
Thank you.
Right, I'm a resident of Danes Green. I live in one of the houses backing onto the site. Residents bordering the site are very concerned about the adverse effects of the development as a result of the height of the proposed houses, their proximity to the Danes Green properties, the overlooking of existing houses and their gardens, and the resultant loss of privacy. However, we fear that these concerns have not been recognised by either the applicant or the District Council. The The planning officer's assessment of this application has not included viewing the site from neighbouring properties in Danes Green, which we think was essential. So we are particularly pleased this morning you carried out an inspection of the site from the gardens of some of the houses in Danes Green in order to assess your own understanding of our concerns. Parts of the site, including those nearest Danes Green houses, are frequently waterlogged for long periods. You may have seen this morning on your site visit. Early on in the application's progress, I was told by the applicant's agent that floor slab levels, and thus the height of the houses above existing ground level, would not be known until the site was laid out. Condition 9 in the officer's recommendation requires that floor slab levels are approved before work starts on the dwellings. Surely this is too late to start assessing the impact of the height of these buildings. Furthermore, it must mean that any assessment of their impact was made without knowing how high the buildings would be, and we do question how a meaningful assessment could be made without this knowledge. The report before you concludes that the levels of privacy for residents of Danes Green after development is built will be, the word used is adequate. This seems to be in the opinion based not on analysis, and it does beg the question what was meant by the word adequate. We don't think that having 14 houses with windows at ground and first floor level look straight into previously private back gardens at a distance of 10 metres and a further 3 houses at a distance of 20 metres can be described as adequate. The development will quite obviously impinge upon existing levels of privacy, reducing them significantly, and we feel sure that you will have appreciated this on your site visit. Residents will have to live with the consequences of this development indefinitely. We think that this is unreasonable and it's totally unnecessary. The applicants have already shown their willingness to amend the scheme. This is the third version. Surely it is not too late to properly address residents' concerns. If the application is considered to be acceptable in all other respects, we ask that it be deferred so that a scheme that overcomes the concerns of neighbouring residents be designed. If you are minded to refuse the application today, we ask that a reason relating to the effect on existing residents be included.
Thank you. Okay. Finished?
I have. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Can you just pop your microphone off,
Oh.
please? And now the supporter, Ms. Kirsty Clifton, is that right?
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to speak again as agent for this application on behalf of William Davis Homes. This application was first validated in January 22 with the intention of supporting your emerging local plan, demonstrating the suitability of the site and its proposed allocation for much needed housing in the district. That could not be more pertinent now at such a critical point in our national housing crisis. It also underpins the Council's duty and commitment to delivering housing to address the acute lack of affordability within the district, with property prices on average almost 10 times the annual earnings of full-time employees. All councils urgently need to address this, but for Wychavon there is a specific need to secure planning permissions, particularly for full detailed schemes such as this, to address the current and significant undersupply of housing land, and where this supports the spatial strategy of the well-progressed local plan. Since the deferral of a decision by the committee in March, we've continued to engage with members and officers and have worked hard to address the specific concerns raised. In particular, we've revised the approach to sustainable drainage, created more usable open space, including allotments that will be gifted to the parish council, and proposed vehicle-activated signage as a speed reduction measure. The scheme also increases the biodiversity net gain and continues to go beyond energy standards, reducing CO2 by over 16% through the provision of solar energy. The scheme has the technical, environmental and design support of officers and statutory consultees, and the final detailed matters and obligations secured by conditions and statutory agreements. We've acknowledged the relationship to neighbouring homes and the nearby thatched cottage, ensuring it is at an appropriate distance and protecting and enhancing the existing boundaries between them, using the appropriate house types in key locations to protect amenity. The scheme continues to deliver affordable homes for rent and first homes of a mix to reflect local needs as fully supported by your housing officer, and incorporates market and affordable bungalows alongside a mix of 2 to 5 bed market homes. Building homes is not just about bricks and mortar, it's about supporting vibrant communities. And these homes will bring significant economic benefits in the creation of jobs in construction and related industries. New residents will contribute to the local economy and council tax revenue, supporting businesses, essential services and infrastructure. William Davis is a family-owned home builder that prides itself on building quality homes across the Midlands. The company's standing as a 5-star house builder for the past 9 years recognises their reputation for delivering sustainability, craftsmanship, excellent customer service and local employment. This application helps to deliver homes that are vitally needed and will meet its obligations for infrastructure, a quarter of which will go to the parish, in accordance with SIL and policy standards and as set out in the Advanced Draft Section 106 Agreement. We hope that you'll recognise its important role in supporting housing delivery at such a critical time and support your officer's recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. 2 seconds. You've rehearsed that. Right, next we move to the local members, Dan Birch and Nick Wright. Do you have any questions or comments that you would like to ask any of the speakers? Yes, Dan?
Yeah, just the one question to Ms Clifton, if that's okay. So we had a discussion earlier today about the range of affordable homes, and it's really good to see that there are some first homes in there. If this was approved by the committee today, would William Davis be open to a discussion around whether a couple of the affordable homes could be changed to shared ownership through, in terms of no change to the house type, just change in the affordable homes type? Would you be open to that sort of discussion?
Would I be able to defer to the client on that point, please?
Thank you for your question, Councillor Birch. Whilst I don't think we'd be against that, I think it would drop below the 25% first homes that are required in the policy.
We were on about more in terms of the social rent change to shared ownership.
Oh, apologies. Yeah, certainly willing to consider that. Please. Sorry.
Any more points or questions either of you have? No.
No, thank you.
Thank you. So we'll open it up to the committee then. Councillor Kearsey.
Chairman, thank you. Yes, just a couple of questions, please, to the agent. You might remember that last time we had quite a discussion about the balancing pond and the green infrastructure, and I can see obviously that you've changed the design, which, by the way, thank you very much to the officers for giving us the details of the previous one as well, so thank you for that. As it stands in the report, it states that you're providing 40% green infrastructure. Is all of that on site?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so within that 40%, have you included the balancing pond in that 40%?
Yes, it forms part of that area.
Okay, so in follow-up, as you know, green infrastructure, its definition means that it needs to be open and recreational. How do you see the balancing pond being open and recreational?
My understanding is that the recreational benefits are also visual recreational benefits. There is an understanding, my interpretation of the policy is that that allows for drainage to be incorporated into that 40% area.
Councillor Tourier.
Thank you. Question, first of all, to our officer. I'm looking at the housing queries, and they're asking about the nationally described space standards, and asking, it says strongly encourage that the affordable housing dwellings for rent meet that standard, and also the first homes. Can you just clarify if that's the case, please?
That element secured in the Section 106 agreement to ensure that happens. From the draft Section 106 agreement that I've seen and is in, I believe, the Annex 1 committee report from the original presentation to members.
I have a question for the agent. I'm also concerned that all the social and affordable housing is in a very small area. Is there any way that you could expand it and move it about a bit?
We often have that question. one of the points is in terms of the management of them and the take-up of them for registered providers in terms of a preference for them to have these grouped in an area. But the point is, in terms of actually how they align, we have a mix of affordable houses on that main route through the site, so they're quite central to the scheme. And actually, in terms of their the access to them as well, there's different points of access to separate them out across the site. I think, you know, in many terms you would experience them and they would form part of an integral element of that sort of community on the site. I don't see them as being particularly separate from the market houses. I think they would be considered as part and parcel, and you would experience them and shared access with private units, market units as well.
Thank you. Councillor Morris.
Just a quick question for the case officer. When we were on the site visit today, we saw that there's still a part of the footway that's not been completed. And I notice in the committee report, it says that matter has now been resolved and the remaining section of the footway is expected to be completed in due course. I always have a bit of a concern when somebody says in due course. What does that actually mean? And if what's been arranged was to fall through, is there any fallback that we would have so that it could be completed? Thank you.
Ron Burton. My understanding is that is with highways and is being progressed. I don't have an exact timetable for you, but I believe it's relatively imminent. I believe the local member may have a better updated position than myself actually on this. I'm not sure if that's true or not, Councillor.
Yeah.
Highways have provided confirmation, so we've had this from our County Councillor Mark Bayliss, that Highways will take responsibility and ensure that that pathway is put in place at the start of 2025, and then they will recharge that to the developer of that site, given the fact that that developer has failed to meet that obligation.
Okay, happy with that? I wasn't expecting a lot of questions because this has all been done before, really, when it was deferred. So if everybody's happy with that, the speakers please return to their seats at the back. Thank you very much for coming. And I introduce Dan Birch, who will be addressing the committee, and then Nick Wright following that. Thank you. Over to you, Dan.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to the members of the committee for hearing this application again, and thank you to the speakers. William Davis have built over 500 homes in my ward, so I know the developer well. And because of that, I know that their house quality, the building quality is there. This is a developer that we are keen to work with, that us as ward members are keen to work with, that the parish council are keen to work with, and residents, most importantly, are keen to work with. Now, the rapid increase in size of Fernal Heath is a huge concern to me, and the damage it's causing to our community is scary. And the report before us suggests that while it's only 40 homes, it is not going to have a catastrophic impact. What it fails to capture is the full weight of the impact that the residents of Danes Green in particular will have to endure. The properties have long relied on light from the north, benefiting from vast open countryside behind them, which have provided not only light, but more importantly, the privacy that the residents need to live comfortably. The historic significance of Danes Green, and in particular Thatch Cottage, means that most properties on this stretch have smaller, less intrusive fencing due to planning restrictions, and you'd have seen that on the site visit. Both homes that we visited, neither one of which had a 6-foot fence at the back of it. Many homes have large bay windows at the back to ensure that they can continue to enjoy natural light, as these properties all back directly onto this site. Now, this site is part of the South Worcestershire Development Plan Review, and through a consultation process it was deemed suitable for development. But this committee needs to ask itself, what is the best use of this site? By placing the bulk of the properties along the southern boundary, we are maximising the impact that this development will have on Danes Green while offering expansive views for those in the new development. The committee deferred the application on the basis of design, and following that, James and his team at William Davis went away and redesigned it. And following that, we had a residents meeting where I would say about 80% of the residents down Danes Green were in attendance. We went through the design in a lot of detail and looked at every bit of it and ensured that we consulted thoroughly. And the feeling is that we all share is that the new design has not sufficiently addressed some of the concerns that have been raised by the local community. The repositioning of the Suds Pond to the north now means even more properties back directly onto Danes Green, with new homes just a few feet away from Thatch Cottage. This field has historically acted as a natural runoff area for Thatch Cottage, and replacing this with houses unnecessarily increases the risk. What we were hoping to see was a layout that helped and not hindered Danes Green. Instead, we have fewer bungalows to the south, a cluster of affordable homes, and a narrow, unprotected boundary. So I'm simply calling upon the committee to protect Danes Green. Our request is incredibly simple. We want to ensure that the green space in the north is properly utilised, and we want to ensure that the effect on residents in Danes Green is minimised. This is an allocated site. We have the opportunity to do this properly and to do it well. All we want to see happen is the impact on these residents reduced as much as we possibly can. So a simple but effective solution that the residents came up with at the residents' meeting was flip it. If this development was the other way round, if you can just picture that in your heads, the number of houses that would back onto Danes Green would be massively reduced. But unfortunately, that wasn't an opportunity at the time when the design was redrawn. But to us, that would be the ideal solution. But as a minimum, we ask that the final wording of the conditions be designated to the Director of Planning and Infrastructure with a requirement to liaise with myself and Nick to ensure we can limit the impact as much as possible. We want to see the additional planting on the south. We want to see the impact minimised by houses moved as far away from that boundary as they possibly can. We want to see the residents in those homes protected as much as we possibly can do. And we ask that the committee support us in achieving that goal. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Nick?
Thank you, Chair. I would also like to thank my colleague, Councillor Dan Birch, for succinctly summarising the proposed development at Danes Green, and also to the other speakers for their contribution. And I also want to acknowledge the input and discussions that we've had with William Davis Builders to try and find a way forward with the design of this site. For both Dan and I, the proposed further development extends the urban sprawl into open land, not only affecting the outlook for residents in Danes Green considerably, but also damages the community of Fernal Heath. When this first came to the committee in March, I did outline several objections to the application. I'm not going to repeat them. They are basically, it's not well located in the village, it has no increase in infrastructure. In fact, there's been very little in Fernal Heath in the last few years, and the local schools are full, and Dilmore Lane remains dangerous. Land is good agricultural land, and considerable flooding has occurred in Dilmore Lane. I could go on. In fact, nothing has changed. This was deferred in March, really, for design, but I mention these factors because the development down the road, just the other side of Suffolk Way for 130 houses, with similar planning reasons for refusal, was upheld on appeal, as we know. In this appeal, the inspector, amongst other things, said at the end of the report, he said, however, even if there were a conflict with the development plan as a whole, the outcome of the tilted balancing exercise would form an overriding consideration, sufficient to say that planning permission should be granted in any event. The tilted balance, of course, is dependent on a 5-year housing supply, which at the moment I think stands at roughly 2.3. I mention this because I've been repeatedly asked about the lack of 5-year housing supply, which obviously affects all major housing applications. And I would like to just say a bit about this because not only is Wychavon blamed for this lack of housing supply, but also comes to committee members as well. Current shortfall is not a failure on the part of Wychavon District Council, but a consequence of national policy that unfairly penalises success. Wychavon District Council has consistently responded positively to the government's agenda to boost the supply of homes and meet housing needs, and over the past 10 years has delivered housing at a pace exceeding targets. This proactive approach has meant the land allocated in the current local plan has been developed well ahead of schedule. Wychavon's housing delivery test results consistently exceed expectations, standing at 145% as published in December 2023 and reaching as high as 155% in previous years. However, despite this achievement, current central government requirement does not allow councils to take past delivery rates into account when calculating the forward-looking 5-year housing land supply. And this creates a paradox where councils that have delivered effectively and again ahead of all schedules are penalised, whilst those with poor track records face no similar consequences. This is neither fair nor logical and has led to speculative development, which undermines the carefully considered policies of local plans. These speculative applications often bypass the strategic planning framework, leaving local communities frustrated and disempowered. And this, in my view, is what we have at the moment. And I've said all that because it's come up so often, and we are in a position where major developments do suffer from this. You may decide as a planning committee that this similar scheme could be in another location with better infrastructure, etc. But recent experience of appeals from recommending refusal doesn't lead to an optimism, given this details of the 5-year housing supply. So alternatively, the site, as it is part of South Worcestershire Development Plan review, and as such we need to make the best use of it as possible, as Councillor Birch has said. And he's detailed conditions which could be implemented as far as I know. And there is no planning reason why there can't be a reduction of the number of proposed properties backing onto Danes Green, which would benefit the residents considerably.
Thank you very much. Just before I open it up to the committee, there was comments made about the height of the buildings. So I just want Kieran to explain that a little bit and see where we are with the height. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of, there was comments about the height, and clearly that is an assessment in terms of the impacts on adjacent residential properties and their associated amenity, both in terms of their garden areas and as well as their habitable rooms within those properties that may be affected. I think what we heard in the sort of officer presentation was in relation to the separation distances that exist between the existing properties and those being proposed, and that the proposals do exceed those within the published SPD in terms of separation distances there. I won't go through those. I can obviously clarify what they are if members need that, but they are exceeded. And there was mention about finished floor levels and essentially that being a matter for condition. What I would say is that's quite common in terms of major applications, because ultimately we've still got conditions relating to drainage schemes to come forward. So there normally is some sort of variance in that. So it's very hard to fix it specifically. But what the condition does give the council is control over those. So if those levels were significantly higher, obviously that could be a problem. There's no reason to think that they shouldn't be able to achieve a reasonable levels, but we do have control going forward as a result of that condition, or we would if permission was granted. So that's the reason, and members will be familiar that that's a common condition on sort of applications full and outlines for major development. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Kieran. Now, the committee, who's going to kick off? Paul.
Thank you, Chairman. I've rarely heard, actually, 3 speakers speak so sensibly about a planning application and almost speaking together in a way about this development. And that's been reinforced by Councillor Birch with the proposals that he's put forward, and by our erstwhile chairman, Councillor Nick. And what I would like to hear from the officers is their view of the proposals that Councillor Birch outlined to the committee as a way to move forward.
I think I'll address this in 2 ways. On one hand, everything said is eminently reasonable, but on the other hand, this application, as you'll note, has a prefix of 2021. This application has been in the system a long time. It's been before members previously and deferred to secure design revisions. I think it's acceptable and fair to say that the applicant expects a decision to be made. As I say, everything that's requested is completely reasonable, but I think really a decision needs to be made on this, and whether members find what is presented is acceptable, or if not, it's not, basically. Yeah, and just to add really to that, I think
there's one thing in terms of suggestions and reasonable suggestions, but ultimately there is another thing whether they're required to make the scheme acceptable in planning terms, and I think that's where officers are. I think there are ways in which the impacts could be minimised, but given the separation distances involved and the orientation of properties, those relationships, they're deemed acceptable by officers in planning terms, and that's the professional judgment from that perspective. So whilst we might think actually, yes, increasing the distance could improve the outlook, could have benefits to the existing residents, in planning terms, in our view, it's not reasonable to require that. Obviously, there has been discussions as part of these revisions, and ultimately the separation distances involved, like I say, based on the SPD, based on the orientation of the site. I mean, the properties, for instance, are located. A number of them are located to the north. Things like that obviously have different impacts on daylight and overshadowing, but equally the separation distances of the blocks are in accordance with the SPD as well. So I think from those perspectives, I don't want to be dismissive of those suggestions, but I think ultimately if the question really is if we went back to the developer and they said we're not going to do that, do we think we've got a strong reason or grounds to refuse on? I think we would struggle to demonstrate harm in terms of amenity based on those standards. And just one more thing to point out, we assess the impact on existing residents the same as we do on new residents. So in terms of whether a garden space is acceptable, is assessed in the same way. And members will be very aware of the types of garden spaces that are approved in modern day housing and deemed acceptable in amenity terms, and they're very different to what we might see in sort of older properties with longer gardens, etc. So purely on an amenity space, that just gives you a bit of a flavour about what's deemed acceptable compared to what we might be desirable, if that makes sense. So I hope that helps. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kieran. Emma Kearsey.
Chairman, thank you. The points I was going to actually raise were briefly what Carl and Kieran have said in answer to Councillor Middleborough's question, actually. Really taken from what everybody has said today, but particularly from what Councillor Birch and Councillor Wright have said, there clearly has been extensive consultation and discussion since we deferred this application last time. They've both thanked pretty much the developer for having all that consultation. There's been the consultation with residents, and it clearly has been extensive. And we can see, obviously, from this that it is very different to what was before us. So it's really questionable. I mean, and at the end of the day, it is a full planning application. So really, we need to determine the full planning application that's before us. We can't delegate to the Director of Planning and Infrastructure to change the full planning application. It's just not in our gift today with a full planning application before us. So that request, if you like, from Councillor Birch, I can't really see that we are able to do, but also because of the amount of consultation and discussion that's taken place to get to this point, there clearly isn't any point or room really for any deferral or any really further discussion. I hear about swapping it around, but then if the balancing pond is in a different place, is the drainage going to still work? So I hear what you say, but I think with this one, we have actually, as you've stated, there's been a lot of discussion about it, a lot of negotiation, and fundamentally it is an allocated site within the SWDP. So really, having had that discussion from both of you, I will propose approval in line with officer recommendation.
Thank you very much. Emma Sims.
Thank you, Chair. I understand the principle of this, and it's been deferred, and the councillors and officers have been working with this developer, but development must be right, and I totally agree with my two fellow councillors that if residents do not think this is right and not happy with it, then the developer has to step up, actually. And I really feel there needs to be more negotiation, whether or not this is a full application. My fellow colleague is absolutely right about it and very knowledgeable on that. But I actually do think, developers must step up and listen to residents.
I would just make the point, that Carl made earlier, that this has been going on since 2021, and it's been before this committee before. It was deferred from March to now. Now, if that wasn't enough time to do what everybody wanted, deferring it now is not going to make any difference at all.
Sorry, I appreciate that. I just think it's very important for developers to know the importance of what their schemes are.
Well, you've made that point very, very well. Does anybody else have any? Paul?
Very briefly, I will second the recommendation put forward.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody that wants to say anything else, or shall we go straight to the vote? You happy with that? Can't see any hands or heads nodding or anything, so. Nick?
I'd just like to say that, having been at the first deferral, I'm quite disappointed with what's come back. I think two of the main issues with that were the addressment of the bomb crater drainage and the affordable housing all being grouped in the same place. And what we seem to have done is just jiggled it all around and left it the same, only probably with upsetting the residents even more with some of the locations of the properties. So I'm very disappointed, but I also hear the problem that we really can't defer this again, and we don't have any grounds to refuse it either. So I'm going to have to support Councillor Kersey's.
Okay, thank you very much. If nobody has anything else to say, Heather, would you like to take the vote, please?
Am I allowed to make a response to these comments that have been made?
No, I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. We run the system and that's the way it works. I'm sorry, you're not allowed to say anything else. You've had a very... You said your full 3 minutes and a little bit, if I remember. So I'm awfully sorry. I'd like you to be quiet, please, from now on, and let the committee do its work. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So, members, you're voting for approval based on the officer recommendation that's set out in the report. So, can I ask you to raise your voting cards, please? Those in favour? Those against? So, Chair, that's 8 in favour, 3 against. That motion's carried.
Thank you very much, everybody. That ends that one. Those that wish to stay are very welcome to stay, but we understand that you might want to leave home. Thank you.
Right. Are we all there? Moving on to item 8. This is planning application land at Bretfordton Road, Badsea. We have 4 speakers actually. And Councillor Ian Devine, Badsea and Alderton Parish Council, Clive Holt, and Mr. Matt Charnock and Mr. Nick Rawlings. Is that right? Thank you. Shall we have the other speakers? Could you like to come up to the front and thank you? Thank you very much. Could I ask, are you all right? Seating comfortably. Could I ask Matt McConville, who's going to outline this application for you? Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. To start with, I would just like to draw your attention to a letter that you were sent from a Mr. Holt. Mr. Holt was due to speak.
Mr. Holt is here, actually. Mr. Holt is looking on your right.
Oh, are you? Sorry, okay. You can read on. No, well, if you're here, you're welcome to read your letter. Are you sure? Yes, I was going to summarise it, and it has been circulated, but apologies, I didn't realise you're here yet. Thank you. So, Mr. Holt is here, so he will be speaking. Apologies. So, moving on to the application, it is for up to 95 dwellings and the associated infrastructure, with all matters reserved except for the access. How do I get this to move, Carl? It's not moving. Oh, there we are. Sorry. Thank you. So, members visited the site earlier today. We had a walk around the site and looked at it from both the Brentforton Road side and access through the properties, and at the access point off of Birmingham Road. The site is highlighted here with the star. You'll see that it's on the north edge of Badsea, as discussed. It is within a sort of fairly linear part of built form within the village, and it's made up of a number of sort of relatively flat agricultural parcels, demarked by natural landscaping and fencing. As I say, the application is for 95 dwellings. It measures approximately 5.8 hectares, with the net developable area being 2.54 hectares. So that would give, if the reserve matters, if it was approved and the reserve matters were submitted, if 95 dwellings were proposed, that would give a net density of 37.4 dwellings per hectare. And there would be over 50%, based on the indicative plan that we have, 50% of the site would be open space. It is located, as members saw, outside of the limits to define limits to development, and would therefore conflict with policy SWDP2. However, as members are aware, as a result of our 5-year housing land supply position, that policy is considered to be out of date, and the fact that it sits within open countryside is no longer a robust reason on its own to refuse an application. With the tilted balance engaged, it's necessary to consider 2 things. So the MPPF essentially says that it requires planning permission in such cases to be granted unless the application of policies in the MPPF that protect assets of a particular importance provide a clear reason for refusing the development. So that's the protection of assets. And any adverse impacts of approving the development would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies in the framework as a whole. So it's looking for, it's either protection of assets, is a possible reason, and significantly and demonstrably outweighing the benefits, so any impacts that are so negative as to warrant refusal. Our statutory consultees considered the proposal in landscape terms, so we've mentioned the fact that it's within a relatively linear part of the village. The landscape officer considered that, and whilst she did feel that it was somewhat out of keeping with that linear form, the extent of its impact, it was not considered to be sufficiently harmful as to warrant the refusal of the proposal in landscape terms based on the current growth of the settlement and the cumulative growth of the settlement. In biodiversity terms, there was considerable discussion in respect of biodiversity, particularly in respect of the impact on light-sensitive rare bat species. Amendments to the landscaping scheme were made, and it now incorporates a new dark corridor in the landscape strategy for bats and foraging. And there is also a condition which is considered important that requires the submission of a detailed lighting scheme, so it can be ensured that the lighting considers the impact on the protected species, particularly bats, and doesn't harm foraging habitat. The Highways Authority considered the proposal, as we saw today from site. It's accessed off of Birmingham Road, which actually has a fairly lengthy visibility display, and it comes off a fairly straight section of Birmingham Road. And the Highways Department felt that it was acceptable subject to conditions and planning obligations. The indicative plan shows that there is sufficient space on site for it to be designed in such a way that it could comply with good placemaking principles and the requirements in our design code. And the heritage assets were considered, and our archaeological advisor felt that, subject to a condition requiring further investigation, there would be no impact on buried archaeological assets, and the conservation officer felt that it didn't impact on any surrounding listed buildings or conservation areas. And our drainage consultees reviewed the proposal, and they have raised no concerns in terms of flooding or surface water drainage. And the proposal also proposes to use renewable and low carbon technologies to meet the requirements of the SWDP in terms of renewable energy. And as such, the recommendation in the report is to delegate authority to the Planning and Infrastructure Director, subject to the completion of the Section 106 contributions as set out in the report and the conditions that are also set out in the report.
Thank you very much. Councillor Devine, you have 3 minutes. Thank you very much.
I appeal to the committee on behalf of an extremely worried village to reject this application. The overall cumulative effect on Badsey of this development, when you take into consideration the 155 houses already either approved or approved in principle, will devastate Badsey, an agricultural village. This is also on agricultural land. Indeed, the cumulative number of houses in the application amounts to 445. At the moment, we have 1,500. So that's a huge increase, which will be detrimental to village life as the residents know it. Imagine 1,000 cars extra using the B4035, which is a designated HGV route and already suffers many, many delays. Highways have refused other attempts to install traffic lights on this dangerous and inappropriate junction due to health and safety and the terrible effect on air quality. So why is it now being seen as a feasible option? The vast majority of traffic from this development will join the B4035 at the junction, and further congestion will result on the A46. If you surveyed the road for cyclists, and the developers seem to think there's lots of us around, we reckon that in 1 week you would maybe see single figures using that road. Neither will people walk to the school or the shops due to the HGVs regularly mounting the pathway in order to pass oncoming vehicles. People will be at risk. Badsey is at present a Category 1 village, but with one shop, a butcher and 2 pubs, it can no longer be classed as such and will not cope with 400 plus households. The shop has parking issues with the construction workers and new residents using it. Many of the old folk who see the shop as a lifeline will be left queuing outside in inclement weather. The first school has an annual intake of class size of 30 children, but with 663 more homes added in the catchment area, there'll be no space for kids. The idea that it can be extended is fanciful. In fact, the only way to extend the school is either up or build on the playgrounds. Anyone who knows the village will understand that. The villagers deserve to have the quality of life that they enjoy at the moment, even though the roads are fairly busy. Well, they're very busy. We respectfully ask you to refuse this application on behalf of our community, which will suffer greatly as a result of this and other new developments planned. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Clive Holt, you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm somewhat surprised that Wychavon Planning Department have put forward this planning application for Bloor Homes for final planning consideration when the company has been named under investigation by the Competition and Markets Authority, the CMA, under Chapter 1 of the Competitions Act of 1998. Into suspected breaches of competition law. The report suggests that Bloor Homes, together with 7 other major house builders, may be sharing commercially sensitive information with their competitors to influence the sale price and build out of new homes on development sites. Would it be prudent for the Wychavon Planning Department to consider deferring a decision on Bloor Homes planning application until the Competition and Markets Authority have completed their investigations and their findings have been made public? I'm certainly not suggesting the Planning Committee reject the application today, but simply delay the decision to a later date when all parties are better informed on how best to proceed. As you can understand, proceeding with this application at this time, when viewed through the eyes of a wider community, the media and social media influences, may not be favourable received as one would first imagine. This would certainly be the case if planning approval is today granted only to find the Competitions and Market Agency press charges towards Bloor Homes and at some point in the future, once they have completed their investigation. Carrying on. On matter of continual housing development in Badsey, I and the residents of Badsey take exception with the term sustainability when Wychavon DC and housing developers frequently use to justify their planning approvals. In fact, sustainability is defined as the ability to maintain a required balance. The National Planning Policy Framework endorses this definition by stating it is important to ensure the development is sensitive to surroundings, does not have an unacceptable impact on local roads, and exploits any opportunity to make a location more sustainable. The term transforming, on the other hand, is defined as to create and deliver a marked change in form, nature, and appearance. In the case of Badsey, this equates to taking away and discarding the long-standing values, traditions, customs that have been nurtured by Badsey residents over generations. There lies a tipping point where persistent overdevelopment will transform this village closer to becoming an anonymous suburb of Evesham.
That's, I'm afraid you've had your 3 minutes, I'm afraid, especially as you were just getting into it, but thank you very much indeed for those comments. Thank you. And Mr. Matt Charnock and Mr. Nick Rawlings, you have 3 minutes between you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. We are delighted to see that your officers are recommending approval of our outline planning application this afternoon. Your officers' report provides a fair and balanced planning assessment of the application proposals, and in doing so sets out in detail the various representations received. Firstly, the report confirms that the site is located in a sustainable location at Badsey, a Category 1 village in the settlement hierarchy of the adopted development plan. The Council's current housing land supply position is also explained in the report, and in that context our application proposals will deliver much needed affordable and market homes which carry significant and substantial weight respectively in the planning balance. Notably, if approved, our aim will be to start delivering the new homes before the end of 2025. We presented our emerging thoughts and ideas for the site to Badsey Parish Council and undertook public consultation earlier this year. We listened carefully to the constructive views and concerns of parish councillors and residents on matters such as highway safety in the village and the type of housing to be provided. Reflecting that early engagement, our extensive discussions with other statutory consultees, our proposals include extensive off-site highway connectivity and safety improvements, including footway widening and new signal-controlled pedestrian crossings on Brett Fortin Road and Birmingham Road to be delivered at an early stage of the development. Notably, Worcestershire County Council as the Highway Authority do not object to the application subject to conditions securing the early delivery of these improvements and planning obligations to be secured through a Section 106 agreement. We'll also deliver provision of a range of affordable and open market homes, including bungalows, 2, 3 and 4 bed houses and first homes. Indeed, 40% of all the properties will be affordable homes. Substantial financial contributions will be provided towards education infrastructure via the Section 106 agreement, a significant proportion of which will go towards the expansion of Badsey First School to a 1.5 entry school. Approximately 50% of the site will be provided as green infrastructure to be maintained by a management company. This will include equipped play areas, informal recreation space, a retained and enhanced orchard, and biodiversity enhancements to include new native hedgerow, tree planting and wildflower grassland. Allotments could also be provided if desirable. Finally, Bloor Homes is a private, family-owned company and a 5-star house builder based in nearby Tewkesbury. We've successfully delivered a number of developments in Wychavon District and wider South Worcestershire, and our legacy is very important to us. As such, we can assure you that we are committed to delivering a high-quality development in Badsey that we're proud of. We would very much welcome your support for our application this afternoon. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Now we're pleased to see Mark Ward, who's the councillor in that ward. Mark, have you any questions for the speakers?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other committees, members have questions? Councillor Sims.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to ask the applicant, please. You say this is a potentially sustainable development, but yet it's 15 minutes walk to the centre of Badsey, and the Wychavon District Council Urban Design recommendation, thank you, suggests this does not consider this site to be the most sustainable location for this village to grow. I just wondered about your comments for that.
The Highway Authority do consider it an acceptable distance from the site, but albeit with the improvements proposed in place, of which there are a significant number along Birmingham Road and Brett Fortin Road, to include the 2 control crossings, which will take people in a safe environment through to the top, in effect, of the high street.
Yes, carry on.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. I just wonder if that's actually true, because I'd stated that I think one of the parish councillors mentioned that this is a designated HGV route. So are you really going to want to walk along that footway with children?
As a general point, this is one of the first issues when we went to see Badsey Parish Council at the start of the year, and it was a concern of them, and we took that away, and we undertook a lot of work with our consultants and indeed with the Highways County engineers and highway engineers to look at what's possible to improve the current position, obviously, and that would also provide connectivity to our development. So a lot of work was done on that, including, I know, safety audits by third-party professional engineers, and I understand that the highways have concluded that the proposals generally would be acceptable, and they looked at that in a lot of detail. It's a very good point, as I say, one that we took away and took very seriously and spent a lot of time to resolve.
Do you have any further questions?
Sorry, I did. I just wondered about wheelchair access, modernised scooters as well. Is the footway going to be wide enough for people to be able to use buggies and wheelchairs?
It was determined, I'd say, I don't have the finite report with me, but it was assessed in terms of by those professional engineers and highway, and confirmed by highways would be satisfactory, and it's a significant improvement to what is there at present as well. So it would provide clearly the connection to our site, but also to the eastern part of Badsey that isn't there at present. So that's how we would see that.
Just to add to that, the improvements include a combination of 3 metre and 2 metre footpath provision and widening. So there is an element of 3 metre wide footpaths from the site along the east side of the Birmingham Road, where there will be controlled crossings. There's also future-proofing, if you like. Notwithstanding, this application is to be determined on its merits. You've obviously heard numbers relating to the cumulative schemes, but this is very much an application for up to 95 dwellings. But in respect of the infrastructure that we put in place, it could absolutely link to any future forthcoming improvements associated with other applications, to include the signal control junction, which I'm aware one of the other schemes is proposing. So on its merits, in its own rights, the improvements that we're proposing are deemed to be satisfactory to the Highway Authority, as my colleague Matt has said, and has been through a stage 1 road safety audit.
It's for your information on page 160. It's about footways in the officer's report, Emma. Councillor Rowley, followed by Councillor Middleburgh, followed by Councillor Dye. Councillor Rowley.
Yes, I've also got a highways question, and it's a pity we haven't got the highways here today. I understood that when you've got quite a large number of houses in a development, there should be 2 accesses, 2 highways accesses. 95 homes, and there's only 1 access on a very busy road, which will likely be jammed up with traffic lights anyway. How is that sustainable?
Right. Would you like to answer?
Thank you, Chair. There is only 1 access for highways, but as has been previously mentioned, the County Council's Highways Department has put this application through a fairly rigorous process, which includes a road safety audit. They generally their main goal is, or main consideration is safety, providing a safe and secure access for both vehicles and pedestrians, and they are our experts on telling us whether what is being proposed is safe and reasonable, and in this case they have, even with the road safety audit, considered that this is an acceptable, safe access.
Just to come in, if I may, as has been referred to, a road safety audit has been carried out, which provides a certain high-level degree of comfort. But just in terms of numbers, you'll recall at previous committee, we permitted 180 houses at Pinvin off a singular access. And whilst the numbers may be alarming in terms of the context of a singular point of access, it's not unusual for schemes considerably larger than that to have a singular point of access. As I say, this has been through a very robust assessment process, both through the RSA and then through obviously that being assessed and the proposal as a whole individually and cumulatively being assessed by the Highways Authority. So on all the evidence before us, this points to a satisfactory and safe means of vehicular access that's appropriate to serve this development.
Thank you. Councillor Middleborough.
Thank you. It's a question to the agents, the developers. During your presentation, you stated that a management committee would be formed to look after, I presume, amenity land within the site. Have you talked to Badsey Parish Council at all about them taking over responsibility? And if you haven't done that, would you be willing to talk to Badsey Parish Council? Because we're going to be in a position here where the occupiers of the house pay a management committee and a precept to the parish council, and that's open land which is available to anybody who lives in the village. They're paying twice for something, and I would have thought it was in your interest to have spoken to the parish council.
Thank you. It's again, that's a point that we raised when we met with the parish council at the start of the year in terms of the future management, and the opportunity was that we suggested was for the parish potentially to take that on, and that still remains. My recollection was potentially because there's already we've got an orchard that's proposed as part of our scheme, or a current orchard that's going to be enhanced indeed, that the council were reluctant to take to adopt that and take that on. But the offer is there. At present, the management company doesn't that, and the 106 negotiation could enable that opportunity to happen if they so wished.
Thank you. Councillor Dyke.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, this is to the agents of Bloor Homes. The picture that's up there at the moment, it's a funny shape for one thing, and you can see the long red lines that go right up to a number 2. So I have just a few questions on this. A, why is that going up like it is? What does number 2 signify? And coming into the body of the development, this is up to 95, which we all know will be 95. But what you've put down there is actually 59. Being the sad person I am, I added them all up. So I wondered why you put something which looks much prettier in a picture when another 40% or so is going to be added to that. And from number 1, you can see the road going up to the turning head at the top. Just to the right of there, there's a little tiny additional turning head. It's not that easy to see on that screen, but it's very plain in the reports on page 141. So I wondered why all that's there, and do you own the rest of the property?
With the Matt, would you like to answer that, or would you like to answer that?
I'm happy to address them.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, by all means, the case officer can substantiate, but I'll take them in the order that, if I can remember, they were asked. So, firstly, the red line to the the red line's disappeared. The red line that you saw along the eastern site boundary, that's the line for the surface water drainage outfall to the watercourse, which is basically captured by the attenuation basin and then released in a controlled discharge rate through a pipe network. As it advances north, it then stops. I think it's around 8-10 metres, something like that, short, before it opens up into an open channel of drainage into the brook. So basically, the the sustainable drainage strategy that was submitted with the application basically captures the water, it channels it into the attenuation basin, which does have a permanently wet element to it. It is then discharged at a controlled rate into the brook. The illustration you see on the screen there is very much an illustrative layout, and that would capture it captures block arrangements really. So there would be an element of terrace, semi-detached and detached properties in there. So what that is really trying to show is that within that block configuration, how you could accommodate up to 95 dwellings, plus allow for all of the green infrastructure and the drainage arrangements and the access and estate roads that go with it. And I believe your last question was a second stub. We think that's a private drive to another property. Sorry, I didn't.
Sorry, Chairman, if I may.
Yes.
Do you own the piece of land above your application that you see here? That field, is that in Bloor's ownership?
No,
it's not?
It's not in our ownership, no.
Okay, thank you. It's just the turning head then.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I'm not sure which turning head that
Just
sorry. That's probably a way of accessing the orchards, and if there were ever any allotments, obviously sometimes people like to drive their vehicle up and unload the paraphernalia that goes with it, working an allotment, and that would provide for it.
Could I just add as well, just that it is 95 dwellings, and that the density that Matthew explained earlier is for 95, and that would be 2 bungalows, 2, 3, 4 bedroom homes. So apologies if it's not come across that way, but it certainly has that capacity to do so.
Yeah, well, I must admit, when I first saw it, I thought it was disingenuous to put up a plan like that with no explanation at all. So perhaps you'd like to take that on board for the future.
Thank you. Councillor Morris, followed by Councillor Kersey.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it was just a quick point of clarification. Seeing as Mr Holt mentioned it, I think it would be worth having it clarified. This referral to the CMA, is that something that comes under planning, or is that something that we just take on board but we can't attach any weight to it? Thank you.
Thank you. Just a minute. You'll take good answer that one. Kieran.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So yeah, it's a good point, and thank you for reminding me to clarify. Our view is it's not material planning consideration, so whilst those investigations are potentially ongoing, we're not aware of them, they shouldn't interfere in terms of us making the decision, and at the end of the day, a decision relates to the land that is granted. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Sims. Councillor Sims. No, your turn.
Sorry, I thought there were other
She
councillors
was.
who put their hands up.
Would you like
Sorry.
to just put the microphone a little nearer to you?
Yes, I will. Sorry, Chair.
That's
Thank you very
better.
much. Just one question. Can I be blunt with the applicants, please? Why does it have to be 95 houses? Why can it not be 59 houses, which might appease the residents of Badsey? Because there's a massive amount of building in Badsey, and it is really distressing to the residents of Badsey. Please don't answer me with viability. Please could you even look at reducing the number? This is an outline application. Is there any chance that you could actually do that just to appease members, residents in Badsey? And I respect Bloor Homes. I think you're excellent developers, by the way. So, but, I mean, would that be a consideration even?
Well, firstly, thank you, Councillor, for your kind comment at the end. This is an outline application, so we do have the ability of reserve matters. And as I trust has come across, we are very engaging as house builders. We will go and see the parish council, and we will talk to councillors about the layout and configuration arrangements. In terms of the number, as you will have heard from the density, it's one where, in any number of respects, we do feel that it's around what is appropriate for that site in the context of all of the other land use arrangements that we're proposing. The green infrastructure on this site is 50%, which is significantly more than what policy normally requires. But anything that is generated by way of the impacts are all capable of being mitigated through condition or design or 106 contribution. So that's our general approach. But it is very much an outline application proposal. That's the key thing that I would ask you to bear in mind here. There will be a whole reserved matters process to go through.
Thank you.
Could I just add, I think it is important, whilst to make the point, and I'll go back again, we have heard the type of dwellings will be very important here, hence why we mentioned earlier bungalows. What hasn't been mentioned are downsides, a specific downsizer product in between the sort of family to bungalows. So all those discussions, as Nick said, will happen at the next stage as well. Thank you.
Can I just bring him up for a minute? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It was just to say that, as has already been sort of alluded to, this will come back as a reserved matters. The reserved matters will look at detail, at the design, the layout, the density, how it relates to the surroundings. But I just wanted to say that one of our considerations is the sort of efficient use of land as well. So there's a balance to be had really between the number of houses on there, the density that is surrounding it and the character of the area, and making efficient use of land which is considered to be in a sustainable location. Excuse me.
Councillor Simmons, does that answer your question?
Very quickly, could I come back, Chair? Just to say, as long as there can be a consideration of reduction of the numbers. All know about the, I think it's SW15, about, the density and what amount of development you can have on the land and the best use of the land. But I do wish you to consider it, please, because it is only fair because of the cumulative effect in Badsey and 1,000 cars potentially going through that village. And it does need some serious consideration. That's all I'm asking, please.
Thank you. Councillor Turier.
Thank you. For the officers, I think I briefly saw a slide that had allocations in Badsey, and I know that we have to consider the one that we're talking about, but I would like to see just roughly where the allocations are in relation to this one, with the possible disruption of it all being built at the same time.
Have we got details of that, Matt?
Thank you, Chair. Through you, if that's okay. So this was just there in case it came up to provide some context, but bearing in mind that every application has to be considered on its own merits, and it essentially has to mitigate the impacts that it causes, which obviously we consider this one does. But you can see that that I'm aware of, there are 4 larger developments in Badsey. These are the ones that are mentioned in the committee report. You've got the location where it says 90 and 75 at the bottom. That's an allocation. There's 2 applications in at the moment for them. And then obviously there's a site, and then the 35 dwelling one is one that was considered at an inquiry a couple of weeks ago, I believe.
Yeah, just to update members on that, as some members will be aware, and Matt alluded to, we actually had an appeal hearing earlier this week on the site that's earmarked there with the 35 figure. It won't be a surprise to members that many of the issues that you're talking about here and have been raised were considered by the appeal inspector there. Obviously, our position in that appeal, we effectively withdrew from it because the original refusal reason centred around the education department's comments, who had an original objection relating to the school. Through the appeal process, the education department's position changed, and they felt that financial contribution to go towards the extension upgrading the school could take place. There was capacity at the school to expand it. They have documents that support that position. As explained to a number of members earlier today, that document isn't public domain through the planning department, but could be accessed through the school. But we through the education representation we had at the hearing, that we take that at face value. So there is capacity to expand the school to meet the emerging need. So we stood down from that refusal reason at committee. At appeal. Further to that, in terms of consistency of decision making, clearly as there, we had an education refusal reason. We weren't advancing cumulative highways impact because, again, highways were satisfied that taking the 35 unit scheme on its own, and highways will be aware of emerging schemes coming forward, such as the allocation. Obviously, you've seen their comments on this, so they'll have done a cumulative impact as well. So the highways consideration has been set in sort of cumulative terms. In terms of wider impact on services, we have to defer to the relevant specialists or experts. If Severn Trent, for example, are saying they are satisfied with their facilities in the village, if highways are saying, we have to take that at face value. And at appeal, that was effectively our position to the inspector, because let me just be quite frank, if, say, for argument's sake, Severn Trent is saying everything's okay, and we or I go, no, it's not, as I said to the inspector, you're going to say one or two things to me. One is, well, what's your qualifications to back up that statement and go contrary to Severn Trent? And secondly, you've got a cost award coming because you're not able to substantiate it. So the relevant service providers in regards to this, whether it's education, Severn Trent or highways, in terms of the road network, are saying this site, the 35 housing site, and cumulatively, this is acceptable. So exercise caution, although it's a very valid reason, and there will always be a point where cumulative development becomes too much. I think in the context of this site, the appeal site there, because of their locational sustainability and the ability to mitigate through the financial contributions, as you'll see in the report, depending on the house types and sizes that come forward, that's a substantial amount of money ranging from approximately 1.2 million to 1.7. That is considered again by the relevant consultees to adequately mitigate the impacts of that development in terms of service delivery effectively. So in terms of the mitigation offered by the scheme before you by Bloor, and in terms of being consistent in our approach in terms of the appeal hearing we've just had, what has been presented on the table is considered to be a satisfactory package of mitigation measures through either the application nature itself, conditions, or the Section 106 agreement. And so that was a consistent approach in regards to the 35 unit site, which, as you'll note, is further to the east and further away from the village centre. And I just stress that it was never raised within our position or at any point through the application appeal process. There was no argument about sustainable location, and clearly that site is further away than this site to the village core and other facilities. So packaging that all that together, we consider the site is sustainable, and the package of measures in place are more than adequate to mitigate any appropriate and relevant impacts from it. Okay.
Thank you. I was just concerned about the number of lorries and building and just general mess, Thanks.
Okay. Just in terms of construction phase, of course, there'd be a construction management plan, and that, through a mechanism in there, that will, by its nature, need to take into account if other developments commence at the same time. And again, highways would be a consultee on that in terms of any access arrangements and things of that nature. So again, that would be picked up and addressed appropriately through conditions and the discharge of those.
Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chairman. Could we, I think it's possibly a question for the officer that he may then need to take to the applicants. Is that all right? Yeah. Thank you. If we turn to page 162 on the officer's presentation. And I was reading this with interest because it's quite unusual that our biodiversity officers go into such detail. And I can understand why, because this is, at the moment, a very green site leading to some corridors into wider open countryside. And particularly when I went down to the third paragraph, and if I get the pronunciation wrongly, forgive me, but the Barbastell bats, we don't often see things where we've got a habitat that's one of the rarest bat species in England, and that their presence on the site is of county level importance. And I'm very keen that we don't ignore this. And the recommendations for a new north-south corridor to be maintained as a dark corridor for the bats, because the one along the main road will be unsuitable if you make a new access and have lots of cars going along it, seems very reasonable. So I'm asking if the revised submission proposed could go into any future full planning application, and also looking onto the other side, that our biodiversity officers seem to have come up with some very good conditions, even down to holes for hedgehogs. And if we could do this, wouldn't it be great? Because we don't often. And the other thing is that we try to avoid that the biodiversity net gain goes into our neighbouring authority at Malvern Hills, because whilst Malvern Hills is beautiful, let's try and keep Wych Haven with its wildlife as well. So I'd like to see that this doesn't get missed, shall we say, if this goes on to the next stage. Thank you.
One could argue that Wych Haven is beautiful as well.
Well, that is absolutely my argument, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Armstrong. Are there any more relevant questions for the speakers? No? Well, thank you very much for speaking. Would you like to return to your seats? Thank you. Sorry, Mark's been a long time.
Chairman,
Yes.
forgive me, I didn't have an answer from
Didn't
the
you?
applicants or the officers.
Sorry, you went on.
We,
so,
we
so,
said how
so
beautiful we were, but we just need...
I lost track of the basketball
The question was...
bats. Which answer did you want?
It was whether they will be prepared to take these conditions through to the next stage.
Sure, the answer is yes, isn't it? I'm not answering on behalf of the case officer.
I shall merely remind them, should it come back to committee on the full.
Okay, we will remember it when it comes back.
Sorry,
the reserve
I can assure you that we will. We've seen the draft conditions that deal with ecology specifically, but also matters that impact on ecology, including lighting strategies. We've already considered the northern boundary of the site where there's potential to put a new hedgerow across by way of a dark corridor for bats. So you say the site in itself has got 50% green infrastructure. So in terms of our overall commitment to biodiversity on the site, as anyone who perhaps has seen some of our more recent developments, we do take that incredibly seriously with regards to nesting boxes and hedgehog holes within the site. So again, this is a outline scheme. When it comes to the reserve matters stage, we'd be more than happy, again, to revisit this and see what we can design in.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right. Well, thank you, everybody. Could you return to your seats? Thank you. I'm sorry, you're still okay. So I will now ask the ward member to speak. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Planning Committee. I understand that you had a site visit this morning and I hope you found that useful. As we know, Badsey has already seen a disproportionate level of development, and I also understand we do not have a 5-year housing land supply. However, notwithstanding these issues, I still believe this application should be refused for the following reasons. The development does deviate from the existing pattern of development in Badsey, going northwards into open countryside. SWDP 25A parts 1, 2 and 3 deal with enhancing and conserving the landscape setting. I don't believe this application does enhance or conserve the landscape setting in this place. Moving on to the Urban Design Guide, which is SWDP 21, it does not consider this site for development. It is not, according to the Design Guide, a priority site for growth in Badsey in terms of its location and distance from the village centre. This is on page 146 in your agenda. Wych Haven District Council's urban design team states that this development is some way out from the centre of Badsey and the village needs to retain its local character. There might also be issues with regard to parking based on the density of the site. There are other sites, including CFS 1228, which would provide better integration into the village. As stated, pavement improvements show the difficulty of cycling or walking to the village centre, which exceeds both the time and distance recommended by the urban design team. School capacity has also been noted, and it has been noted that there will be a financial contribution to this school. But it does not address the lack of space and parking at the school. There are also significant insufficient spaces for early years education and potential requirement for SEND students which require additional resources within the classroom and affects classroom sizes. Additionally, there is also an historic quarry, and the site is in close proximity to a landfill site, again making this site unsuitable for development, and this is on page 150 in your agenda pack. Additionally, the site would result in a loss of agricultural land, and this would be about 4.4 hectares according to the agenda. And this is the BMV land, class 3A, with 1.8 hectares of that being physically built upon, and the remainder not being accessible. It has been stated also that the land contains an area of archaeological importance, both Romano and medieval settlements, which should be a factor in refusal. Additionally, the outfall and the Environment Agency has a policy that drainage outfall should be no less than 8 metres from any top bank of a river. From my understanding, this development places this outfall in or within 8 metres of the Bretforton Brook, which is a designated river, and therefore breaches the Environment Agency's policy. I won't take any more time of you, but to summarise, noting the position of the 5-year housing land supply and the fact that the site is not a priority site and there are significant factors making it unsuitable for development, I believe the balance is in favour of refusal. And I do thank you for your time, and I hope you consider these points along with those points raised by the Parish Council when determining this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ward. I'll open the debate to the rest of the committee. Councillor Kersey.
Chairman, thank you. Can I personally thank and applaud Councillor Ward for being here to address us at committee on Badsley's behalf today, when I hope you don't mind me saying that obviously that this is during your period of recovery, so thank you very much. We as a committee very much appreciate that, and I'm sure that Badsley very much appreciate that too. The chairman of the parish council said that he is extremely worried for Badsley. I have shared that worry for Badsley for some time now with regards to development in Badsley. I have many connections with Badsley. In fact, I was born in Aldington, which obviously is part of the parish of Badsley. And interestingly, when I was 6 months old, my parents moved from Aldington because it was too difficult to get anywhere from Aldington with 2 children in a pram and whatever, and for the facilities that were there. Now, without anybody making any comments about that's a long time since I was 6 months old. Thank you very much, Councillor Dyke. But although I believe those challenges do still exist, however, when I say that I've been worried about Badsley for a long time, that's why I've been encouraging Badsley for quite a long time to actually start to produce a neighbourhood plan. And I would really urge Badsley Parish Council to really embark on a neighbourhood plan. And I would ask Councillor Ward, in his support of Badsley Parish Council, to support them and encourage them to do that. Because today is a day at committee that I'd been dreading for Badsley for a long time. What the neighbourhood plan would do would mean that this doesn't ever come before committee, this application. It would mean that it would have already been refused. It would fundamentally already mean that the developer wouldn't have put this application in unless it was the allocated site that Badsley residents themselves had chosen for it to be. And it would also mean that the fact that Wychavon don't have the housing land supply would not affect Badsley in any way. We've seen the slide up there with all the other development and potential development and whatever in Badsley, and as a parish and as a village, I really urge them to go from this point on and take on the work of doing a neighbourhood plan to mean that I, who am also been worried about Badsey for a long time, are not in this position at committee today?
Thank you, Councillor Kersey. I'm sure there's some more comments on this one. Councillor Middleburgh.
Thank you, Chairman. I found again interesting listening to what the three speakers have had to say. And I think we should put this in the context that it's an outline planning permission that we're actually looking at today. And I hope my intuition was right, that Bloor Homes were actually listening to what was being said at the committee today before they come back, if we pass it today, before they come back with a full application, because a lot of very good things have been said by the members today about the development. And it is in a, well, it's not detached from the village, but it has its problems in connectivity. But that being said, and I fully agree that they ought to have got going with a neighbourhood plan. It's a bit late for today, and I hope that they will dwell on what Councillor Kersey has actually said about neighbourhood plans. However, since it's an outline permission, I think my intuition in relation to what Bloor Homes have said, I hope it is true, that I will move recommendation of the officers' recommendations, which are set out on, if I can find the page number, and if I can read it, page 169.
Thank you, Councillor Middleburgh. Councillor Birch.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to sort of reiterate the concerns that Councillor Ward had raised in terms of what this could do to Badsey as a village. I spent some time in Badsey. I think it's possibly the only village in England that's home to 2 MPs, so it's one of the places that we head to quite frequently. And the Brepton Road itself is incredibly fast. It's incredibly narrow pavements, and if you speak to anybody who lives on the Brepton Road, they all raise concerns about how uncomfortable they feel walking along it. So the area isn't really suitable for active travel anyway at the best of times. People simply don't feel safe walking around the proximity of the area. And my further concern is that putting a development here does start to change the shape of Badsey as a village. It is linear in its design in this area of the village, and by allowing this development to change that, how much further is it going to go? We can see already that there's another empty bit of land to the north of that, and there's a little bit of land next to it. So by allowing this development to take place, are we then opening the doors to changing Badsey as a village as a whole? And as has been mentioned, just changing it to becoming a suburb of Evesham, which is absolutely the last thing that we want to be doing. Badsey is a village, and it should remain as such. So I do have some severe concerns about what would happen by allowing development to occur in this location due to the change in Badsey's appearance.
Thank you, Councillor Birch. Any other comments from anybody? This is, obviously tea time for people, but we could do with a few more comments. We've had no proposals at all. Oh, yeah, sorry, we've had one proposal. As there's no more comments, have we a seconder for approval of this? We've had a proposal. Have we anybody to second it? No? Okay. Councillor Morris?
Yeah, very reluctantly, I will second this.
Are there any more comments? Councillor Dawes?
Yeah, I will reluctantly support this, provided we could put something in about, which has been discussed, about the developers discussing handing over that common land to the parish council. And I did notice when that was mentioned the parish councillor was rolling his eyes. So perhaps that should be with some help from the ward member as well, to maybe smooth the
So
waters.
this is an outline planning permission. So I take those points, certainly. Thank you for that. Are there any more comments before we... No? We have a proposal from Councillor Middlebury, seconded by Councillor Morris. Heather, would you like to take over?
So, if I may, Chair, could I just clarify then what the motion is? I'm going to just read out some wording and then check with the proposer and seconder that they're happy with it, if I may. So we've got to delegate authority to the Director of Planning and Infrastructure to grant planning permission subject to the completion of a Section 106 legal agreement to secure the obligations set out in the report, but also including an option for the Parish Council to adopt the on-site public open space, and then also the planning conditions listed below, and then allowing for any subsequent amendments to the obligations and planning conditions as required by the Director of Planning and Infrastructure. Are we happy with that? If I could have confirmation, yes.
Councillor Morris, are you happy with that?
Can I just check with Councillor Sims whether you're happy, because you were very keen on more being looked at in terms of what was being asked of the developer. I'm not entirely convinced that's covered by that, but maybe you...
So I think Councillor Middlebury proposed it. So Councillor Middlebury proposed. So I'm asking you if you're agreeable to that. Councillor Middlebury is happy with that.
You are,
Okay, thank you.
So if I could move then to the vote based on what I've just read out. So if you could raise your voting cards, please. Those in favour? Those against? That's 10 in favour, 3 against, and that motion is carried, Chair.
Thank you very much. We'll have a 6-minute break before the last one. Thank you. We'll move briefly on, swiftly on. If you want to take your seat already, don't worry about it. Can we concentrate on item number 9, which is planning application 20/01565, land at Cheltenham Road, Broadway, where we went this morning. And I'd like to welcome the speakers who are already seated in the hot seats. Mr. Kevin Beasley, Clerk of Broadway Parish Council, Mr. Robin Goldsmith and Mr. Mike Dito. Is that right? Good name. And could I also introduce Adam White, who's going to present this application. Adam.
Thank you, Chair. The site is located outside of, but immediately adjacent to the defined settlement boundary or Broadway. That shows a general location there. So the site extends to 1.9 hectares and comprises agricultural land with a redundant outbuilding in the centre of the site. So existing hedgerows along the northern, eastern and western site boundaries. Cheltenham Road runs along the southern boundary of the site. Gives you an aerial view of the site there. Site is in flood zone 1. Most of the site is grade 2 agricultural land with an area of grade 3 agricultural land in the northwest corner. The site is located entirely outside of the nearby Cotswold landscape, national landscape, which extends to the south of the site beyond Cheltenham Road. So the settlement of Broadway is located at the foothills of the Cotswold Plateau and is within the national landscape. So in terms of the proposed development, the application proposes the demolition of the existing outbuilding and the construction of a new assisted living development comprised of bungalows, apartments, communal facilities, hard and soft landscaping, parking, new access and bus stop provision and associated works. So the proposal is a C2 planning use. Now that's a different use to a C3 use. I think that the defining difference here is the level of care. So this would be generally accessed off external communal areas, and there would be age restricted to age 55 or overs, and there would be a requirement to have an element of care, I think a minimum of 1.5 hours per week, and that would be secured through a legal agreement. So that then differentiates this from what would be normally a dwelling use. So I think that's a key thing to bear in mind. So this shows some of just a typical cottage which is on the site. This is the communal building at the centre of the site. It's got accommodation above. Also shows a typical bungalow at the bottom. Again, this just gives you an impression of the site. This is looking at the cottages. Again, it's bungalow with a courtyard. So in terms of the proposed access, they also propose new footways. So this is a new 2 metre wide footway extending from the site access. This would then extend into Broadway. There'd be a crossing point, and on the following page, also proposing footway improvements to the existing network as you move into Broadway. So generally, it's going to be a 2 metre wide footway from the site. This is a view from Cheltenham Road looking into the site. Again, view from Cheltenham Road into the site. This is a view from Cheltenham Road, just looking at the access points again from Cheltenham Road. It's the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kevin Beasley, you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair and members of the Planning Committee, for this opportunity to speak on behalf of the Parish Council. The Parish Council strongly object to this application. The Parish Council strongly questions the developer's statement that states that there's a strong demand for over 55s accommodation. Broadway already has several such sites located at Brompton House, Breeden Court, Pegasus Court, Kingsdale Court, Parsons Gardens, Leeden Park and Broadway Court, all of which we understand have vacant spaces within them. The Broadway Neighbourhood Plan was produced in consultation with the village, and it clearly identified the need for housing for the younger generation and not for more 55s accommodation. The Parish Council would suggest that the facilities within development are more in line with C2 than the C3 than the C2 stated. I know we've had the comment just made, but we still question that. The medical centre in Station Road is already under pressure to provide sufficient services to residents in Broadway and the surrounding areas, and this additional development would only add to this. Policy NE2 in the Broadway Neighbourhood Plan clearly states the need to protect and enhance Broadway's green infrastructure and its valued landscape. Removal of ancient hedgerow trees and verges is contrary to policies NE1 and NE4 in the Neighbourhood Plan. The Broadway Neighbourhood Plan states in policy BE1 that regard should be given to the historic character of Broadway Conservation Area. This application is located within the principal village farmlands landscape type, described in the landscape character assessment as being characterised by nucleated pattern of extended rural villages surrounded by large arable fields. This application is on such a large arable field. The LCA advises it's important to try to retain the notable contrast between the concentration of dwellings and farmsteads in the village and the preventative unsettled land between them. This proposed development would not allow this guideline. Rather, it would disperse settlement further from the main body of the village into open countryside. And the Parish Council would not consider the site to be in close proximity of the village centre. The Parish Council is very concerned regarding the proposed entrance and exit areas and the pavement improvements. It's in the Parish Council's opinion, this is a very dangerous location. The speed limit in the area is 30 miles an hour, but as hopefully demonstrated by your site visit today, that road is deadly. People do not travel down that road in and out of the village at 30 miles an hour, despite numerous attempts to try and restrict that. It just does not happen. And the amount of traffic going down there is horrendous. The width of the entrance and exit is narrow. Okay, that's fine. I've finished. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Robin Goldsmith, you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Good afternoon. The Broadway Trust objects to the plan advanced by Turley on behalf of Amber Homes. Turley's submissions have made great play on the need for retirement living. They've conflated Worcestershire's and Wychavon's need and sought to apply it to Broadway. Broadway does not have a shortfall in assisted living accommodation. Currently, there are 24 assisted living over 55 properties available on Rightmove in Broadway. The 2017 Wychavon profile of Broadway Parish, using Experian's Mosaic profile, reveals that a very high 86% of Broadway's residents fall in 3 affluent categories: rural reality, country living, senior security. This is not a population looking to downsize. It is mostly one that has downsized and moved to Broadway. Turley states the statistical demand for assisted living in Wychavon District is detailed in the supporting updated benefits statement June 23, which provides robust evidence of the shortfall within Wychavon District. The location Turley suggests to solve this Wychavon District shortfall is 31 miles from Hartlebury in the north, 24 miles from Droitwich, 13 miles from Pershaw, and 6 miles from Evesham. It could not be further away from the centres of population and need. Amber Homes asserts, and your planning officer agrees, that this is a Class C2 development. This is wrong in law. C2 is defined as use for the provision of residential accommodation and care to people in need of care, other than a use within Class C3, which is dwelling houses. Class C3 is use as a dwelling house, whether or not as a sole or main residence. What is a dwelling house? It is a unit with its own front door and private facilities, as are the units which Amber Homes proposes. Unequivocal support for that proposition is found in the High Court decision Rectory Homes Limited versus the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government. If this committee decides that these units are not dwelling houses, then it will lay itself wide open to an application for judicial review. Broadway does not need this housing scheme. The dwellings are clearly C3, and the proposal should be rejected. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lito, you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
It's good to be here this afternoon, and thank you for considering our application and the proposed assisted living community that we're proposing, and that has been assessed by your officer as being policy compliant and recommended for approval. You note the proposal has evolved greatly since we initially submitted the proposal in 2020. It's reduced in scale, and we've had extensive authority and statutory consultation and responded to those comments in relation to landscape, drainage, highway improvements, etc. In partnership, I believe we have come up with a much better scheme. It's important to note that it is a C2 use class scheme. It is compliant with adopted development plan policies SWD2, SWD20 and emerging policy SWDP23, which supports such proposals outside development boundaries where relevant criteria is met. One of those key criteria is evidence of specialist accommodation for older people in Wychavon, which we've already heard about. We do believe that this policy meets that need in a specific way, as there isn't similar properties in the area. The development achieves good access to public transport services and facilities. The proposed development will also deliver significant benefit for the local community, which includes that there will be a place where people can age in place and provide active community for the people that live there, a release of local housing stock for families and younger people, and also these schemes have been known to improve the health outcomes of those who live there and reduce the pressures on local social services and health and not increase them. The scheme also responds to the needs identified in the neighbourhood plan in terms of enhanced gateway into Broadway along the Cheltenham Road, new community opportunities and facilities that the community of Broadway can use, and new employment opportunities. Whilst it's easy to focus on these policies and technical aspects of the scheme, ultimately our objective as an investor and operator of these schemes is to provide a positive community where older people can age well and thrive and able to age in place. I was at our similar scheme to this, which is also a C2 scheme in Balsall Common just Friday, and it's always satisfying to see how people there are actually, it changes the lives of people living there for the better. You see older couples, often older single people, thriving in a community that provides friendship, activities, and know that there's support there when they need it. We'd love to be able to deliver a similar scheme in the community of Broadway, and why we respectively request the committee to vote in favour of the proposed development today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The ward members are Councillors Kersey and Councillor Sims. Have you any questions? Councillor Sims first for the speakers. Councillor Sims?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair. The question is to Amber Holmes, please. Can we clarify, or perhaps our legal team or planning officers, this issue of C2 and C3, please, firstly? Thank you.
I think that's probably left to... So we come back. Do you want to come back to this? Or you want? Kieran?
Thank you, Chair. So, I mean, it is. It isn't straightforward in some respects because there is a matter of judgment on each case, that we have to assess how the scheme operates and whether the care needs move it into a C2 use. In terms of how extra care sort of operates, there's generally speaking, it adapts with sort of care needs as they potentially progress through the individual as they age. So it's adaptable in that respect. Usually, there's when they access those properties, I think there's conditions that require sort of a minimum age. But in order to qualify for those units, there's normally a requirement to have some care needs when you access them as well. So it's from day one there has to be a level of care required. There is a lot of case law on this because it's in the past there has been, ultimately that is a matter of judgment that we have to apply whether it is C2 or C3. But generally it's that a level of care need from day one, a limit to the who can access those, so there's an age limit required as well. And like I say, there's that need to have care as a minimum, and then that potentially is adaptable throughout. The extra care model is really to allow individuals to move into these units and stay there, and hopefully stay there until the end of their days, really. So without having to move into other care, the care adapts around their needs as they progress. So that's the model that's been put forward to us. I think officers have assessed that and deem it to fall within C2 based on what's been provided by the applicant and that clarification. It's very different to sort of open market in that you buy a property, you have no restrictions in terms of care needs or accessing that, and you can come and go in that respect. But they are individual units, so that's why they are often likened to C3, because they're not your traditional care home where you'd have a room within that. They are something else because they do provide an individual property for individual property units.
Do you have a further question? To the speaker, would you like to ask Mr. Leto the same question?
Yeah, I cited as an example the other scheme that a C2 scheme that we do operate successfully in Borsall Common, which is exactly based on this model. Whilst they look like normal homes, they're not. They are built with ageing in mind. The bathrooms are built a certain dimension to ensure that in the event that future care requirements are required, you can introduce them. The walls are built so that if handles are required, there's well-being technology built into all the properties that we deliver from day one, such as panic buttons in bathrooms in certain areas, so that we, while subtle, future care needs can be taken into consideration. The Section 106 arrangements will obviously take into consideration exactly what the extra care and definition is, and we've already provided some sort of examples to that, and are confident that could be delivered as well. But it's certainly, in our experience, and not just locally, but across the country, it's not just a definition. C2 isn't just because you've got a front, C3 isn't just because we've got an independent front door, but much broader than that. And as has already been said, each resident will require some form of care before they are even accessible into the property and have to sign up to that from day one.
Question?
Thank
Carry
you,
on.
Chair. Sorry, thank you very much for that, both of you. Could you possibly just confirm the legal agreement that this council has set up between Amber Homes and the District Council, confirming that this is a C2 and will be compliant with that obligation?
Adam? Sorry?
The legal agreement hasn't been drafted yet. What we're seeking here is delegated authority to then hopefully approve and then to fresh out the legal agreement with them. What we have is the heads of terms, which will say broadly what will be set out in the Section 106, and that will be the securing the level of care, the age restrictions and the use of the building. So those are the broad heads of terms that we've agreed, and also to include a local connection as well, to just basically really tie down the use of this building. So that's what we're seeking delegated authority for.
That's it. Councillor Kersey.
Chairman, thank you. Some questions to the applicant, please. First of all, I noted that you said that you believed that there weren't other similar facilities in Broadway. Would you like to expand on that, please?
Yes, I'm more than happy. There are, as rightly has been mentioned, other retirement communities or over 55 developments in Broadway. And it's hard to compare what we're offering with those unless you've seen it in real life. I visited each of those communities, And for a variety of reasons, I consider this completely different. Either the age of the existing properties, some of them are beyond their sell-by date, in my view, and I'm not necessarily surprised that some of those properties are struggling to be sold. Others, and we have gone through a list, and we have got this information to hand, because obviously we've got to compare our product with what's there already. Another scheme that's been delivered most recently there by the Spitfire development is very much it's not open for all. It's means tested, and therefore doesn't necessarily cater for the market that we would be catering for. And also some of the others had much higher service charges, which we wouldn't necessarily encourage in our schemes, because one of the things that we want is that whilst this scheme is fit for purpose in terms of being fit for 2024 residents and beyond, it's also it doesn't have the ongoing high service charges that often these schemes have. Just one final point. Also, many of these schemes don't have space that older people still would like. So our scheme is all 2 bedrooms, ample living areas, ample storage areas, so you can appropriately step down into these properties and live comfortably.
Okay, I take from that really that what you're talking about is more cosmetic things when you talk, and also just general practical things, whereas obviously before the committee today, it's the C2 need that we actually need to quantify and decide on that. So everything that you've said, I appreciate what you've said, but it comes across to me as the cosmetic side of things and the age of the things and the service charge, etc. Okay, that's fine. So the evidencing of the C2 need, I've seen obviously extensively in the report the evidence that you've set out, but could you tell me please the current number for the evidence need of C2 requirement in Broadway?
In Broadway, we took our guidance based on what's required from a planning application perspective, and the report that we conducted and the analysis that we conducted stated that there's a need for housing, specialist housing, of a total of over 1,900, as you stated in your report, and 678 of those are associated with housing with care, and therefore it's on that basis.
Okay, yeah,
I've
got what's on. Yeah, page 191. It was more specifically for Broadway. So let me go broader then, bearing in mind I've got everything that is on page 191, so thank you. What is the evidence number for the C2 need in Wychavon for us as a local planning authority?
Do you have that? That's the 600. It's 678 is housing with care. Is that right?
Yeah, that's for Wychavon.
Yeah, that's the one that we were talking about.
Okay, so we've heard a lot about and it's obviously would be in the conditions that it's 1.5 hours of care per week. Now, it also states that it needs to be personal care. I assumed when I first looked at it, because one part of the report states 1.5 hours, but it doesn't say per day or per week. I assumed that was per day, bearing in mind if somebody needs personal care, it would be per day. But it does actually say in the conditions that it would be 1.5 hours of care per week. Can you describe what that would consist of, please, if somebody needs personal care, but it only needs to be 1.5 hours per week?
The definition of extra care obviously will be worked out in due course. On the schemes that we have, it's very broad. For some people, and it is on a weekly basis normally in terms of the minimum. For some people, it's support in the home for cooking, for carrying out support in dressing and other functional aspects. For others, it is pastoral care. I can just put it down to that. It's having time with individuals who spend time with them to support them in terms of some of their practical needs, shopping needs, delivery needs, and wider. For some people, it can be far more intensive. So if somebody does come out of hospital, in one of our schemes, for instance, somebody had a hip replacement, they needed extra support for a period of time, then that is built in and provided in a more intensive basis.
Okay, thank you. And what care facilities and staff are available on site?
There won't be, the facilities that are available are certainly there's wellbeing technologies I've described so that people do have access to support 24/7. We do not have somebody, there'll be somebody present during the day on site though, unless there's a particular care package put in place for that individual's need.
Okay, so there aren't actually any care staff available on site. They would all need to come into the facility.
No, there will be people on site during the day, but there won't be people present on site 24/7.
Okay, so on site, will there be care staff on site as part of your...
There's normally what we were proposing is a village manager that's on site representing Oak Retirement. We work with a partner that delivers that support. If the CQC, we would normally expect a CQC, there's a requirement within the agreement for a CQC registered care provider to be associated with us, and that care is provided not necessarily on site 24/7, but will be provided as part of the 1.5 hours a week care that's provided normally.
Okay, so following on from that, if you don't have your own staff on site, bearing in mind particularly the location of Broadway, how do you propose to provide that CQC domiciliary care in that setting?
It's through our partner, Oak Retirement, which we are successfully delivering similar schemes both in Balsall Common, and particularly in Balsall Common where they're the domiciliary care provider there.
Okay, thank you. And finally, one very specific...
And there is provision for up to 10 staff. Sorry, I've just been prompted that.
Okay. So, and one specific planning policy question. What is the significant benefit to Broadway as the local community?
It's providing, in our experience, as I said before, most of the residents that move into our schemes are from the local community. It's providing those in the local community homes which are fit for purpose with the support they need. And as I said earlier, for most of our residents, it's the community element of this that really is the game changer. Individual loneliness is one of the key issues, irrespective of whether they live in Broadway or any city or any town indeed, for people. And these schemes do help that particular
I
issue.
don't doubt the benefits to the residents, and I'm sure the residents of the development in Balsall Common are very much feeling those benefits. But in the planning policy terms, it states that there must be a significant benefit to the local community residents. So that's why my question to you is, what is the significant benefit to Broadway?
Well, as well as providing a product that is primarily going to be used by people in Broadway, it's going to release housing stock, in our experience, from the local community. And also, in our experience, and this is not our experience, but a national data, properties where people can age well, have the support they need to be supported at home, actually lowers the pressure on social services and local health, GP surgeries, etc., rather than increases them. So there'll be benefits of that ilk as well.
Okay, thank you. And just one final question with regards to the care. And if, Chairman, if you don't mind me referring back to a conversation that we've had quite a long time ago. I'm sure that I asked you, because we've just had the conversation with Kieran about people being able to, in theory, end their days in that facility. Are you able to provide end-of-life care in that accommodation?
I'm not a medic. I can't make statements like that. It would be remiss of me to make such a statement, and I apologise.
Okay. No final question? No, fine then. Before I ask everybody to come in, Councillor Sims, have you got a further question? Before I ask Councillor Clapworthy, then Councillor Rowley.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to speak with the applicants, please, and possibly the officers, but the applicants, about the footway that there is an intention to deliver for the north from the site into Broadway. And I know that Highways, in their first letter, were concerned about the deliverability of this footway and also about the ingress and egress on the visibility splay. And I noticed, and I thank you for that, for sorting that out. But I would like to know about more detail about this provision of this footway, which goes straight from the access as you come out left, straight down, crossing over the Charles Wickham Road and crossing over Station Road. And that is the way that you are intending for your residents to walk to get into the centre of Broadway. There's no pedestrian crossing at all, and that is a busy road. I know it, I walk it 3 times a day, and it's a 30-mile-an-hour limit, which it isn't, in effect. I mean, I will come to that later. And your actual transport survey states that, actually, that you undertook. But my concern is this walkway. Are people actually going to walk all the way down to Station Road, crossing 2 roads, in effect, to go to the village, when in fact it would be easier to cross over, which they could do and would do, and people do actually, which is much quicker, and I've done it. It saves about 15 minutes, actually, to go into the village. So I just wondered if you could just walk me through that, please, because I am concerned about the Cheltenham Road.
You asking me or the...
Okay. Mr. Leto, can you respond to that?
Yeah.
Or would you like to?
First of all, obviously we have worked hard with highways to make sure that they are satisfied with what is being proposed, and that's part of the consultation process that we've been taken. What we envisage is, obviously from a technical perspective, you've seen in the pack, a pavement that's 2 metre in diameter on the same size as the development, then drop curbs at appropriate place, and then a pavement that continues up towards the village centre. We've done the various, from a technical perspective, what's been important to us is to make sure that certainly the responses we've had from a speeds perspective and design perspective, it has passed the road safety audit, certainly, that we have had to conduct to this stage. So we believe that we've done as much as we can, but we're never going to take from an operational perspective, and this is in practice what will happen, and it's hard to say this, in practice we will support people that are struggling to get to the village, and also make sure that matters such as the one you're concerned about, making sure that people cross at the right place, is part of the culture and education process that we give residents that move into the scheme. Not sure if there's anything else you want to add from an officer's perspective.
Is that all right with you? Councillor Sims?
Could I come back, please? Could I...
Briefly.
Please, please could I ask Kevin Beasley, who's the parish clerk in Broadway. Kevin, how long have you lived... how long have you been parish clerk in Broadway? 15. Could you tell me how the impact the Cheltenham Road has had on the residents that live along the opposite side of the proposed development?
I think every parish council meeting we've had over the last 15 years always mentions speeding traffic on the Cheltenham Road in Broadway. It's an ongoing issue. The police do speed checks down there. It doesn't work. The traffic that goes down there night and day does not do 30 miles an hour in either direction. They do 40, 50 miles an hour. Somebody will seriously get hurt on that road. And the proposal to put a footpath on either side of the road, it looks as though you're putting it on the same side as your development, is crazy. Because all you're doing is putting people in the path of oncoming, not only cars, very large lorries come down that road. Somebody will seriously get hurt. Because if they're on road buggies or whatever they're on, if you're seriously thinking somebody is going to walk up with a patient or a owner of one of those houses into the village. That's not going to happen. And just one other point while I've got the air. Broadway is a village.
You're not allowed to make too many points.
No, Broadway is a village and it is not Borsall Common. Sorry.
It is a nice village, I agree. I think, have you had your say? Do you like another question?
Perhaps Amber would like to follow up then, but just quickly, in the first letter from Highways, it said informal pedestrian crossings are proposed, and I haven't heard anything about that. I mean, I do think that would be really beneficial. I know they're costly, but a life is cost even more. And that would in some way mitigate, I believe, the issue of the traffic. You did a traffic audit, and which you employed an independent contractor to do that. I think it was between 11 a.m. and 11:45, northbound going into Broadway. This is a 30-mile-an-hour limit, and I appreciate you extending that with the TRO. I accept that. Was 41 miles an hour. Coming out the other way, southbound, was 47 miles an hour. Now, that is severe to me.
I don't know whether you need to comment on that, do you?
I just wanted to clarify that, certainly just as a statement, as has been highlighted, we are proposing extension of the 30-mile-an-hour speed limit. We're totally aligned with you in terms of wanting this to be as safe as possible. We assumed a crossing, a drop curve type crossing. We wouldn't be averse to any other form of crossing that's deemed possible, but, so we'll be open to that if that's what is felt best.
Okay, thank you very much. I shall open it for questions to Councillor Clatworthy, followed by Councillor Rowley. Councillor Clatworthy.
Thank you, Chairman. For the developers, by circumstances, I wasn't actually on the roadside this morning looking at the site as a whole, so this question may have been asked and answered. But on your proposed layout, in the middle is quite a large area with just the words community hub across it. What do you propose to put in, and what is the community hub?
The community hub at the moment also has some first of all, in terms of the block, it has the apartments on the facility are based above it. There'll be a communal space there for both residents to enjoy that live there. It's where the village manager will be based. It's where care workers will do their assessments and support. Also, in discussions we've had, it's where hopefully it will be a working space that other people within Broadway could potentially come and use and enjoy. The success of these schemes is a key aspect of the success of the scheme in terms of community is making sure that it does interface regularly with the wider community, and that's a hub that we envisage anybody being able to use in terms of a space to meet and socialise going forward. And not just the hub, but as described, it's been really helpful to interface with local landscape officers, and it's the wider community, the green space that have been created will be open to all as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, when you're talking about the age and people potentially going to live there with assistance needs, should we say, more than they do medical needs or whatever, within that community hub, would there be a medical facility?
Yeah, the community hub, as I mentioned, sorry for not being clearer, often has a room for that kind of more private assessment, private discussions as well. So as well, it normally two administrative rooms, one for the village manager who is there day in, day out, one for more private assessments and facilities, as well as the social space. The social space is key in these things. It's where they gather for activities, where people gather for chats, coffees, etc. Because, as I said before, loneliness is one of the key issues that we're facing, unfortunately, within the ageing population.
Just finally, on the point that I was making, from what was raised before, that there wouldn't be, if you like, staff on site 24 hours a day. So if you may have a medical facility there, but what use is it if somebody has a problem through the night?
It's something I feel quite strongly about, because it goes back to how we make these places accessible for people. A 31 unit scheme, or a low density scheme, which is often what is beneficial from being able to, from an aesthetics perspective, a local community perspective, etc., just would not be able to afford to make, from a service charge perspective, if you had staff on site 24/7. So the solution that we choose to pursue is one that there are people on site during the day. There is technology available and a 24/7 care line available during the night, where people can respond to have access to support if they need it at that stage. And it's a balance. I'm not hiding from the fact that we haven't got nurses on site 24/7. It just wouldn't be accessible. It would be, the service charge would be in excess of £900 a month, I would have guessed, for something like this, which defeats the object of making it accessible to local people.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Rowley.
Well, I think my question's more or less been answered, but I'm very concerned that you keep mentioning the problem of loneliness, and yet you've chosen a very isolated site for this development. And people using wheelchairs and buggies, they've got a long way to go, and you haven't convinced me that the footway is going to be adequate for them accessing the village. It seems to me that it's totally impractical. Perhaps you can convince me otherwise.
I'll deal with the two issues. First of all, loneliness. The community itself will look after itself from that perspective. So the fact that you have 31 units with communal facilities, with a village manager on site, that is what generates, in our experience, the community benefits for people to enjoy, and that we've seen in action. With regards to the pathway, we've gone through the technical analysis. We've gone through that also with highways, and everybody seems deemed that what is being proposed is safe and deliverable.
Councillor Dawkes, followed by Councillor Tourier.
Thank you, Chair.
These are relevant questions, if you could
Yes,
keep
this is a relevant question. Well, I think it is. To the applicant, you mentioned Spitfire Homes and they means test people coming in. Does that mean they means test people, and if you're below a bar you get in, or above a bar you get in? But then going on from that, I don't want any detail, I don't want any sensitive things, but what is your financial model? Are these sold freehold? Are they rented? And you keep mentioning a service charge. So could you just give me a couple of bits of info on that?
Yeah, no problem. First of all, and I'm not here to, there's benefits of that scheme. It's means tested downwards, so rather than upwards, the scheme that you mentioned. Our schemes, we generally, at the moment, sell on a 999-year lease. We make it as close to freehold as possible. We're not there to make money on ground rents, etc., and sell, because our desire is to stay in the long term. The service charge basically covers the cost of running the facility, the village manager, the insurance costs, the landscaping, etc. And that is why one of the criticisms, if one analyses these schemes across the country, is that they're very expensive for somebody trying to buy them. And not only the purchase price, but the ongoing service charge. And that's something, whilst is publicly available information, and I appreciate not Broadway, but it's a very similar scheme in terms of size. It's 39 units rather than 31 units. Broadway scheme, the service charge is just shy of £300 a month, which includes all those supports, which is a lot lower than generally schemes that around. I hasten to add, Amber does not make money from that, and hence why we're aligned with the user to make sure the quality of the service is high, but it's at an affordable rate.
Thank you. Councillor Morris, followed by Councillor Turi, and then Councillor Middleborough. Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Chair.
Questions?
My question really is, there's a difference between the developer, Amber Homes' view of demand to that of the parish council, and I would like to sort of get a bit more meat on the bones around that one. Have you done some kind of survey? How can you be so confident that, I mean, you don't just build something and hope that people come. So how do you know it's going to be that successful?
You're absolutely right. Well, because if we build it and they don't come, we are, and in particular, I am stuffed, is a technical term. We do two things. First of all, there needs to be a demand from a broader planning perspective, which we've already discussed and we've gone into. What we then do is, secondly, what I just described, visit other similar schemes, and am I confident that our scheme will offer something that is much better than those? And the answer is again yes. And those are the key things that we review. And it's worth saying, the money that goes into this will be our cash, so we do need to make sure that it's, we've also discussed this, and this is a softer sounding, with local agents, local estate agents, particularly those that have been there for a long time, and ask them quite clearly, what product is it that you think is required in Broadway? And incidentally, one of those local agents have been involved in informing the design development that we've undertaken in terms of units and the topology, etc.
Councillor Turier.
Thank you. The manager that you have, will they be a nurse? And also, if they presumably somebody's ill during the night and they press the red button, where is your care package company based, and how quickly can they get there and organise something?
The village manager isn't a nurse generally. A key part of care at these is the wider hospitality, pastoral care that reserves. So the village manager will be, most likely, hopefully, appointed from somebody that lives locally in Broadway. The residents, every time they come in, just to give you a description of what happens when somebody presses a button or pulls, I don't like cords. It's either buttons or other methodology during the night, or rings 99 or rings the help number. The schemes have a tablet device where you can ring, and that's the emergency device that gets access to the 24/7. It depends on the individual's care requirements. Sometimes their instructions are that we have to communicate with somebody locally, a local family member, and it's they that need to come. On occasions, it may be that it is, if somebody's fallen, generally speaking, when something happens during a night, it's not because somebody needs help getting changed. It is somebody has fallen, and it's more the emergency services at that stage that kick in. And it's our duty to make sure that then they respond and make sure that somebody is communicating with the individual in question whilst that is being addressed.
So basically 999?
Not necessarily. It's not necessarily, but I'm guessing various environments. If somebody has fallen, it is absolutely appropriate that 999 is called, but the individual that they're communicating with is keeping them informed and is aware of any escalations of that situation.
But you don't know where they're based, how far away? I'm just wondering if it was a local company or if they're not.
Oh, sorry. The company would be a local company. Oak Retirement will work with local domiciliary care providers to make sure that they're available. Absolutely, from a domiciliary care perspective. It wouldn't make sense commercially otherwise.
Thank you. Councillor Middleborough.
Thank you, Chairman. A question, first of all, to the officers, and then I want to follow on to the developer. Can you just remind me how many car parking spaces there are on site for residents and how many there are on site for carers?
There's 1 car parking space per unit, and there's 9 for staff, all staff. And a couple, I believe, that's the number.
Okay, thanks for that. And that then follows on. What's the average number of cars, for instance, at your Balsall Common site per unit? Because we've got people here who are 55 and probably working, some of them.
As somebody who's nearing that age, it's an important point for me. I can only base on statistics of what we've seen. It's worth noting that the average age of individuals that we have in this scheme is nowhere near 55. It's nearer 78 and above. Generally, most individuals that come into the scheme either have 1 car when they come, and generally those cars over a period of time reduce rather than increase. So it's important again that we give people the opportunity to drive if they're able to drive until they're 110, but that isn't necessarily always the case, and people give up cars, and hence why it's important that we don't put people in a box and say that because you're 78 you can no longer drive, and therefore we need car parking spaces for those individuals, but we don't need an excessive amount of those because they fluctuate over time.
Can I just come back on something that you said earlier, that you want to encourage the site to be part of the community and for people from Broadway to come out and use the community room. Do you have any provision for car parking space for people to do that?
Yeah, the 9 staff spaces are staff and visitors. So we're not going to have 9 staff on site all the time. So that's going to be a mixture of space. So there will be visitor spaces on site as well.
Thank you, Councillor. It's good to know they're going to go on till they're aged 110. Are there any more relevant questions? In which case, could I ask the board members to address the committee? Councillor Sims first, is that right? Or Councillor Kersey? Should I get a coin out? Or... Councillor Sims.
Thank you. I was just going to say thank you for the officers and for Amber for working collaboratively and over some years actually. So I do respect that. I think that's great, and I think we look for more of that in this planning committee, that collaborative ethos. And I know you have dropped and you highlighted that, it is in the report, from 39 dwellings to 31. And should I say that we shouldn't have any more 55-year-old people? I don't know. I don't think I should make that decision, Should we have younger people? Yes, we would love more younger people and younger homes and younger provision in Broadway, but I caveat that with be careful what you wish for. My main issue is Cheltenham Road. It's scary and it's frightening, and the residents opposite are really frightened living there because of the speed. And I think I'm going to bang on about my blinking informal pedestrian crossing, whatever that is, because that it will in some way mitigate the concerns of residents, because it will slow down the traffic there. And I'd like to know a bit more about the community transport service sort of moving on. I appreciate we've done questions, and I didn't want to bore everybody about asking questions ad infinitum, but I think that's important. Actually, going back to the first report of the highways, they say that great care must be taken to look after our elderly people, and I absolutely accept that is so important. I think we all do here. We're not saying that we don't, and I'm one of those old people, which is unfortunate. But yes, that's all I've got to say, really. So, yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Sims. Councillor Kersey.
Chairman, thank you. From a ward member perspective, there's only a couple of things that I wanted to draw to the committee's attention, because we've had an extremely comprehensive question time. So I would very much thank members for the site visit this morning. That was invaluable in a way that you actually saw the setting and actually saw the site and the field as it is, and you saw that it was contrary to the report, where it actually states that this development would be immediately adjacent to the development boundary, because it isn't, as you saw that we went on a further large field before we got to that. The other thing to draw the attention to the committee, if they didn't see it this morning, and that is relevant to the development boundary, and that is the only housing in the closest proximity were what we would call ex-council houses, so they would have been in their day a rural exception site. So if you go to the development, open market development, it's quite a long way back from the site that we actually saw today. And there's only two other things that as a ward member I would like to bring to the committee's attention. And one of those is that the doctor's surgery has been mentioned, and that yes, Broadway does have a doctor's surgery in the village. I've spoken to the doctor's surgery, and they are currently so oversubscribed that they are actually moving patients out that currently live on the boundary of the area that they have to cover, that they will have to be finding other doctor's surgeries. They know obviously their legal obligations to take those patients in, but they are so oversubscribed they're having to put people on the peripheral who will then have to be travelling quite far to then get to Evesham or Pershore or wherever it may be. And the other thing is, the reason why I press so much about the care was twofold, really, because I personally find it, having dealt with elderly parents that needed care, I find 1.5 hours per week of personal care a strange scenario. And the example that was given, you wouldn't need a meal only once a week, or you wouldn't need to be dressed only once a week. But that being said, the local part to share with you, and it really sticks in my mind, 2 years ago I spoke to, on the doorstep, a lady who owns and manages her own care agency, and she was telling me about everything that's wrong with social care and all the rest of it. And she actually told me about a resident of Broadway that was 100 years old that they provided care to, and she, for an extensive period of time, had provided care to that lady at a loss to make sure that that lady could get care. And the reason why I bring that up, I totally understand that it would be a completely different situation, but we're speaking about employment, and we're speaking about all this care that would need to be provided. There are not carers in Broadway. There are not carers in Evesham. The lady that was speaking to me was having to get carers to go from Worcester to Broadway to be able to actually fulfil those care needs. So I think that's a really important consideration. Those are the main things really from a ward member perspective. And so really then, as I move on to the whole planning piece, isn't it refreshing for us as the planning committee to read a report that doesn't mention anything about the 5-year housing land supply, and it does not, and the applicant isn't able to say to us, you need to engage the tilted balance and you've got a 0. whatever housing land supply. So that in itself is quite refreshing, which might have been why we promoted so many questions. But it is a situation that we're not talking about the 5-year land supply, and we're not engaging the tilted balance. So we need to review this planning application based on the policies that apply to it. Now, I'm sure that members on the site visit today would have looked at the site and made up their own mind that if this came forward, even in the current situation without a 5-year land supply, even with the tilted balance and all those things that we're bored of hearing, that this would not come forward as open market housing. And that's because it wouldn't comply, even in those situations, with SWDP2. So what's before us today is SWDP 20. And SWDP 20 is for the provision of C2 care facilities. And that's everything that we've had the discussion about so far today. Now, as with all of our policies, as we know, SWDP 20 is no different to any of the other policies, and it states the specification in there. It states a little bit similar to rural exception sites that there need to be a demonstrated need. Now, on page 191, it states that demonstrated need broadly. Now, I've actually looked at this, and I think I'm pretty good at numbers, but bearing in mind the numbers that are there for C2 are 1,638 over the next 20 years across the 3 South Worcestershire councils, okay? If we simply divided that by 3, it means that each of those 3 councils would need to provide 27 places per year. Now, what's stated in there is that since 21, so in the last 3 years or 2.5 years, Wychavon have actually provided 165 C2 places. So to my mind, to my mathematics, that means that Wychavon have actually provided double what's been required of them. And that's before we start to, I won't even get into the fact that Broadway are more than providing their fair share, and they currently have vacancies that provide that C2 need. Now, when the applicant spoke about required in Broadway, and I'm sure the estate agents do say that it's required in Broadway because they're getting excited about dealing with these properties, but what's before us isn't want. It isn't somebody wants something with nice curtains. It's purely about the need, and is there an unmet need? Now, so as it stands, if we just look at the figures, that says to me that Wychavon have provided double what is required of them over the last 3 years. But as with all policies, they have to have reasoned justification. Now, SWDP 20 states that the number of C2 need requirement across the South Worcestershire Council are expected to come from primarily Worcester. Now that absolutely makes sense, and it makes sense as a reasoned justification because, as I've stated, there are difficulties getting carers into the rural locations and even into the smaller towns. So that absolutely makes sense on SWDP 20 that it's expected that that need would be met in Worcester. Okay, so even if we look at the fact that, okay, this isn't in Worcester, this is in Broadway, SWDP 20 does allow for that, but it states that if it is not in Worcester as a city, then it states that there has to be a significant benefit to the local community for it to adhere to SWDP 20. And I've questioned 3 times, what is the significant benefit to Broadway? I've heard the significant benefit to the residents in the over 55s development, but I've not heard anything of significant benefit to Broadway. Yes, the residents of Broadway can go into the Amber Homes lounge, but when they've got all the facilities of the Lifford Hall and all of the facilities of Broadway, they're most certainly not going to be trudging down the Cheltenham Road to go into that lounge. So what I would suggest is that the numbers are not stacked up to actually meet SWDP 20. But even if they did, it does not satisfy SWDP 20 on the basis that it doesn't give any benefit to Broadway, let alone any significant benefit to Broadway. Now, one thing that was mentioned briefly in the report, and it was briefly mentioned today, was that if we have residents over 55 then going into this development, then it could potentially free up homes for, as we know in Broadway, that we want young families and all the rest of it to come through to create and continue that community environment with all the people that I went to school with. But the issue with that is that, as we've heard from the parish council and from Robin, is that we already have over 80% population of Broadway are of retirement age, so it would be minimal as to the number of people or houses that would free up. But also what we don't have is that we don't have a condition that the only people that could occupy these properties, if they qualify for the care need are people that currently live in Broadway. So therefore, that could be a significant benefit if we put that as a condition, but I would imagine that that would be a condition that would be overbearing on the applicant. So my suggestion to committee today is that this does not meet SWDP 20, therefore does not conform with SWDP 2, because it doesn't meet those requirements for the demonstrated need, and it then doesn't go on to justify the reason justification to have it in Broadway. Or we say that, yes, it could go ahead with the condition that only that minimal number of people that aren't already retired in Broadway are the only people that can occupy those properties.
Thank you, Councillor Kersey. I'll open it to debate from the committee. Sorry, do you want to come back on that one? Before
we have responded on some of that, the point that was made.
So you've responded. Adam, could you just...
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. It's really just to clarify this position on the policy requirement of SDWP 20. Part 1, so you've got to demonstrate an evidence requirement for that type of accommodation, which we've set out in the report. The second one, which I think there's a bit of confusion, says the scheme has good access to public transport, healthcare, shopping and other community facilities, or where the proposed scheme lacks such access, it can be demonstrated that there would be significant benefits to the local community. I think as officers are set out in the report, given its location, the improvements to the footways, its proximity to Broadway and the facilities offered there, our view is that it does have good access, so therefore you then don't need to progress to part 2 of that, or the second part of that policy, because in our view, it's got good access.
Thank you.
And can I just add to that?
Chairman, could I just clarify on the point that Adam raised?
Yes.
Please, because I hear what you're saying, Adam, and if you look at SWDP 20 as it is, then that might be your understanding. But when you go on to the reason and justification, clearly, when SWDP 20 was written and went through obviously all its consultation stages, as you know, we have to have the reason justification. SWDP 20 was designed to provide facilities of this nature in Worcester and the large towns, and it clearly states, it doesn't say that they have to have access to local communities. It says that if it's not in those areas, then there has to be significant benefit to the local community.
Kieran?
I think we probably better read the reason justification out, because it's I read it slightly different, so I think we just better set this out, because it's point 2 in the reason justification of the policy. It's considered that specialist housing needs identified for older people, e.g. C2 housing, will be delivered primarily in Worcester and in the towns, but also in other sustainable locations with good access to public transport, healthcare, shopping and other community facilities. So that's the first bit, and as officers we're saying it falls within that. Then it says, however, it is recognised that where there is a significant benefit to the community, less sustainable locations may be considered acceptable to help meet the undersupply of specialist housings for older people. And there's a bit more to it. So you've got the first bit that says it should be directed to those sustainable locations, and that's what Adam's said, and that echoes that. It's where it's identified as an unsustainable location. That's when you talk about the local need, and I think that's quite clear between the two aspects.
Yeah, I totally stand by the reason justification of SWDP 20 to me, and hopefully to my colleagues on the planning committee, is very clear. It's designed to be in Worcester as a city and the large towns, bearing in mind obviously this is the 3 South Worcestershire councils that are on the SWDP, and if it is not, then yes, it's permitted, but on the basis, and the trade-off, I guess, is that if it gives significant benefit to the local community. I don't believe that this gives any significant benefit to the local community, unless, as I say, we make it only for people that live in Broadway to downsize.
I think I understand it from the description that Kieran read out. I think your point is valid, but the benefit to the local community, we can discuss that for another couple of hours, actually. And I don't think actually it's, it's quite clear to me. I'll open it to debate. Councillor Morris.
Yeah, I think we might potentially break this. Oh,
I'm
they
sorry,
need to go.
I think we finished for the board members. No,
They
I'm not.
shouldn't be there.
I'm not bringing in the speakers now, I'm afraid. Sorry, you've had your go. Yes, I'm sorry. You should go back to your seats. It's something I forgot. If you'd like to do that, so just so you're not in contact with the microphone. I will open it to debate. This is a really good debate. I will open it to Councillor Morris first, followed by Councillor Dawes.
To break the stalemate, maybe if we had better quality evidence of the requirement for that type of accommodation specifically for the population of Broadway. And if you think about this logically, nobody builds something where they think it isn't going to be used. And I did pick up from one of the speakers the connection with Broadway, because I can see that if you live in Broadway and you've got an elderly parent who lives 100 miles away, you may say, this is available, we're on the doorstep. Whether that would fit in with the requirement for the connection, and whether we could actually ask the applicant to actually give us better evidence, better quality evidence than we have had. Because if we can't, I can see myself agreeing with what Councillor Kersey has said, because when you read the logical reading of SWDB 20, she has an extremely valid point. And the way I'm looking at it, the way to get round that, if that is to be the right decision, is to have much better evidence from the applicant that there really, really is a requirement for this development.
So you don't think your example isn't a benefit to Broadway if you have an elderly parent that come to live near you?
Yeah, I do think it is, but
So-
I'm not convinced that, based on what the parish council have said, they're saying there isn't a demand.
Okay.
So that's my issue.
Okay, Councillor Dawes?
Thank you. My concern is with this grouping of people together in splendid isolation. Here we are, we're taking a bunch of people and cramming them all together out in a corner so we can all forget about them. And I really don't like that as an approach. And there's been a recent appeal where the case officer, this is about affordable housing, but a similar thing where a 100% affordable housing site was put in splendid isolation. And the appeal officer in his covering notes was of the opinion that if it wasn't for the fact that that was surrounded by other houses, he would have upheld or dismissed the appeal. But it was only the fact that it was within a larger community that he was going to take that on. And I think with this, we are building out in agricultural land, a long way from any settlement, with people with generally ambulatory difficulties. So all we're doing is foisting them off somewhere. Now, I agree that it's handy to group people of similar together for looking after them and things, but within a wider space of a full community. And therefore, I really don't like this as a development. But I'll listen to what everybody else has got to say before I come to any further conclusion.
Councillor Burge?
Thank you, Chairman. I think my concern in regards to the point that Emma Kersey has articulated her point incredibly well, but it's almost escalated my concern there in terms of the disagreement that's then been found between members and officers and even members on this committee in terms of the interpretation of SWDP 20. It seems that it's very much open to interpretation, and the fact that Kieran has clearly and Adam have interpreted it differently to Councillor Kersey has. And similarly, I think other members have also had that same predicament. And I think in terms of when we start to speak about benefit to Broadway, once again, that's very much open to the interpretation of the individual. Hence why we're sat here today. The case officer has obviously interpreted it differently to the parish and to what Councillor Kersey has. So I have some concern with if we were to refuse on those grounds, because it does seem to be very much open to that level of interpretation. And I just don't know whether, if it was taken to appeal or anything like that, whether they'd be in agreement, well, which side they'd be on. So that would be my concern at the moment.
Okay, Carl, would you like to come in? Thank you.
Yeah, I'll start with Councillor Morris's comments first, then come on to some of the points raised there in terms of the importance of words. The policy itself doesn't require the provision to actually serve, say, the local village in this instance. It doesn't drill that deep. So what we'll be looking for in terms of the benefits or who it's serving would be the district-wide, district-related provision. And in terms of looking to, say, condition that or through a Section 106 agreement, restricting that to the local host community, to my mind, that would be over-onerous and wouldn't meet the test. It would be so restrictive in terms of just reasonableness, enforcement, and then the viability of the proposal coming forward, it wouldn't meet those tests. So we would look and say, as the policy doesn't require it, we would be looking at the district-wide figures and align with that. And I don't want to bring in housing land supply, but we're well versed with the arguments there that we have villages that have more than contributed to housing figures, but that figure is looked at a district-wide level. And as you know, this government looks at figures from a national shortfall as well. And there are national figures on shortfall of C2 provision that won't expand upon there, but just to give you a context in terms of the specific point you made in terms of can we drill down to that local level, my answer to that would be no, we can't, basically, grounds of reasonableness. Coming to the importance of words in the policy, I think, and this is why the KCs drive around in very nice cars and things like that, because you can make a career out of debating the meaning of one word. I think if we look at how I always talk, you go back to the plain English meaning of the words, the key words in the policy and the reasonable justification, we have the word primary, or primarily, sorry. That if it was solely to be Worcester and the market towns, it would say only, one would suggest. And the same we have debates around legislation and the importance of words within legislation around things like Class Q and things like that. It's what is meant by that words or that policy. Well, if it was only meant to be directed to Worcester and the market towns, I suggest primarily would not be the word you would use. And importantly, in terms of the trigger point of benefit, inevitably the scheme of this nature will have some associated benefits to Broadway, but in terms of how that policy is structured, you assess it on the locational suitability. Members can take a view whether they agree with us as officers or not that we think the site is suitable within the context of the location and access to services. And if you agree that it does meet those tests, the or isn't triggered as Adam has set out. So it's a two-part test. You assess it on the location and access to facilities. You make your mind up there. If you agree that that is acceptable, you need go no further. But the important word is then the or, because it's or and not and. Only the first part is required to be complied with. Now, if you don't think it complies with that first part, or is triggered, and you go to the second part that Councillor Kersey has articulated, and then you make your decision based on that. So it's a two-step approach, and that's really where, if we are in an appeal situation around that particular point, in terms of policy interpretation, that's where I exercise caution, because I think in terms of the plain English approach and how that is structured and how the reasonable justification is set out, the key thing that will be explored and examined is primarily an or in terms of debating that point.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Kersey, followed by Councillor Sims.
Chairman, thank you. I don't share Councillor Birch's when he said he's got concerns on this. I can honestly say that reading this in detail, and obviously reading the report, but knowing the way that a development plan comes together and that the reason justification is is a key part of that. I don't have any concerns if the committee was minded to refuse this today. And that is that, as Carl says about the plain English, we can read the actual policies themselves to their heart's content, and yes, we could misinterpret them, but ultimately the reason justification is the plain English. It's what was meant when the policy was set in place. And as we know, obviously all the policies have to have that reason justification. And I think it's, as Councillor Morris said, I mean, the actual number, I mean, if we've heard there's extensive provision for the C2 need already in Broadway, a village. Yes, a very attractive village, but it is still a village. So there is already an extremely large provision, not just of over 55s housing, over 55s C2 need is already in Broadway. And also there's still, as of today, that availability. There's 24 places in Broadway Village as of today. Now, we really need to look at this in sensible terms. Broadway, as a village, is not expected to provide the 3 South Worcestershire councils full allocation for the next 20 years. That would be unreasonable to expect, and obviously those services would not take that sort of level. And when we talk about the services, we do want a thriving community in Broadway. And to have a thriving community, you need to have a mixture of residents, not 80%, over 80% of residents already having retired. And so I really do concentrate on the fact this policy is here for a reason. It's to protect development in open countryside, which SWDP2 does. Therefore, that's why SWDP 20 is looked to being used. And I cannot see that either that the need for Wychavon, unless we're saying that Broadway needs to take the 3 South Worcestershire councils' allocation of C2 need for the next 20 years, should be taking any more need. They already have need available. And therefore, it states here, yes, it doesn't have to be in Worcester. It's deemed to be in Worcester in the larger towns, but it can be elsewhere, but there has to be significant benefit to the local community. And there is actually absolutely no significant benefit to the local community. And when we're talking about location, let's just say it as it is. Broadway is very attractive, seen as a very affluent village. That is why a luxury over 55s retirement development is wanting to be built here with very modern facilities, with very nice curtains, with very nice goodness knows what. And that's absolutely wonderful. But Broadway, yes, I'm sure there's loads of people that want to retire to Broadway, but do they need to retire from Broadway? And it is only the need that we should be assessing today.
Thank you. Fair few assumptions there, I think, but never mind. We think, but well spoken. Councillor Sims, Councillor Middleborough, Councillor Rowley. No, not Councillor Sims. Councillor Middleborough, then Councillor Rowley.
Thank you, Chairman. I must say, nobody's spoken about the design of the scheme, and I must say, I think it's a grim, inward-looking scheme. I think it's appalling, the roof tiles, particularly if you're looking from the higher ground to the south, from the southwest. It will look quite a blot on the landscape. And of course, this sort of development could actually be put as an inward-looking development on an industrial estate, I would have thought, for a community together. Notwithstanding all that, I can't see any benefits actually to Broadway coming from what we've heard today. However, I think we need to move on, and by moving forward, I will propose, whether anybody will second me, that we go with the officer's recommendations, and then we develop what's necessary if you don't support that. So I will move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Rowley.
Well, I was going to move refusal. It's against policy.
You can still propose
SWDP
refusal.
20, and also against the poor design, particularly of the community facilities, so-called.
Thank you. Councillor Sims, followed by
I will
Councillor...
second to approve. We're going with officer recommendation.
And Councillor sorry, let me just catch up a bit. Councillor Dyke. You will be beaten to the post. Councillor Dawes.
I'd like to second Councillor Rowley.
Are there any other comments before we bring it to a conclusion? First approval then for this is a proposal for approval, was Heather from Councillor Middleborough and seconded by Councillor Sims. So can we take that? Would you like to take that first?
Sorry, members, can I just double check that, please? So just taking that in order then, we've got a proposal by Councillor Middleborough in line with the officer recommendation for approval, and a seconder by Councillor Sims. Is that correct? Thank you very much. So I'll then move to the vote, please. So, members, can I ask you to raise your voting cards? So you're now voting for approval in line with the officer recommendation. Those in favour? Those against? That's 6 in favour, 7 against. Any abstentions? Just double checking that I've got my maths right. That motion's not carried, Chair.
So we then go to the second motion, I think, which is for refusal, proposed by Councillor Rowley and seconded by Councillor Dawes. Can you take that on?
So the motion is to refuse the application for the following reasons. That's based on SWDP 20, which is to meet the needs of older people, and a design reason, which I think is SWDP 21. I'm just going to check that. Is it 21? Let me just check the numbers, because...
Well, yeah, 21 is design.
21, and SWDP 2.
2 is outside development.
Outside the development.
But 20 is an exception to that if it complies.
Yeah.
If it doesn't...
So that's based on... sorry, I can see the Councillor Dawes just...
You said didn't benefit the older people. You might own it, please. Sorry. You said it doesn't benefit older people. It doesn't benefit the local community, is the wording.
Sorry, I just took the title off the actual policy. So, yes, thank you for the clarification on that. So, SWDP 20, SWDP 21 and SWDP 2 are the 3 reasons for refusal. So, if everyone's happy on that, if I could move to the vote, please, on that. You can raise your voting cards. So, those in favour of refusal. Those against? Any abstentions? So I've got 8 in favour, Chair, 4 against and 1 abstention, so that motion is carried.
Well, thank you very much, everybody, for coming, and we'll meet again in February, I think, so you've got a month off. And sorry? Oh, it's January the 30th. Thank you very much.
Is that it?
Wasn't it?
Yeah, we got there in the end. Yeah, and me.
Yeah.
Right from the start.
I wouldn't want to move.